Let me call my different. Okay, try. So inside func 2, and then the inside func with the same name is not working, is it?
Yes, sir. Like I actually tried function within function within function, so that worked. But I have written inside func here, and I have written inside func with an argument int a. So this is giving an error.
One second. So try moving it inside into a local func. Try moving that func inside.
This one, are you like?
1 second. No, hold on. Can I just get access of your screen?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So you got inside func, inside main, inside func 2, and then inside func within
Online 86.
Yeah. Okay, fine. So it's not taking that. It's a local function. Okay, so it's not taking that. Fine, fair enough. I had not tried this out, so yeah, that's something new for me as well. Thank you.
Okay, sir.
You can stop sharing your screen.
So, there is one more doubt.
Yeah.
So, sir, like, when are you going to teach us about access modifiers? Because I came across this internal.
Later, much later, when we do inheritance.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Any other queries or questions? Okay. So let me take up yesterday. Okay, let me share my screen first. And this is the question that I got from people in the lab yesterday, where you were, trying this out. Not this one. Okay, so I have been writing main 1, main 2, main 3, main 4, main 5. So this is what I've been trying out. Now what somebody else did was created another class. Let's say class 2, in which you had a main. Okay, in which you had a main. So you had now 2 mains actually. Right? So there's class 2, and there's class program, both of which have a main. Now, what I have asked you all to do yesterday was that just make sure that there's only one main in your program. So if I try running this code right now, it gives me a compilation error saying that there are 2 mains. Okay, one more thing. When you run your code and this dialog box is thrown to you, read the message in the dialog box. This says there were build errors. So that means there are compilation errors. Now, would you like to continue and run the last successful build? Now, when it's asking you this question, it means that right now what you have run is not worked. So what have you done last? Would you like to run that same thing that you had successfully done last? Now, when this dialog box is thrown at you, do not choose the option yes. Okay, because if you choose the option yes, what would happen? Supposing you choose yes, what would happen?
It will show the previous results.
Yeah, it will give you the previous output. and changes that you made right now will not be successful. So that's not what you want. You want to actually make changes and then you want to try out the new changes. So whenever this dialog box is thrown at you, always choose no. And when you choose no, it will show you what are the compilation errors in the error list. Sometimes the error list may not be shown to you. If it's not shown to you, you can go into the view menu and choose the error list. So that's where the error list is showing you. So there are 2 warnings. So ignore the warnings, but the error is that more than one entry point has been defined. So there are 2 mains defined here. Now, one option is the way that I have shown you. What do you do out here? What do you do? You rename one of the mains and your code will work. Right? So now there is only one main. So this is what I have been asking you to do. Now the second option is, supposing, let's get back to the same space. Supposing there are 2 mains that you're given in 2 different classes. Now you can't have mains in the same class. You have to, if you're written in 2 different classes, then you can go into the project properties. So if you go into the properties here, we saw this yesterday. You can double click on the properties. And in the properties, there's an option here for startup object, which currently is not set. So when it is not set, it means that there can be only one main. But if you have multiple mains, then you can even go and set it in this way. So specify what is the startup point. So whether class 2 should be the startup point or program class should be the startup point. So you can change this, and once you change this, then the error goes away. So now if I run this now, your code would run. Are we clear on this? So use any one of the 2 techniques. I prefer, rather than giving different classes, I prefer writing main 1, main 2, main 3, main 4. So you can use either in your approach. Okay. Let's go in for what we have planned for today. So I'm going in for a new project, which is still a console app for the .NET framework. And I'm calling the solution as day 2. So whatever I'm doing in today's code would be in day 2. Project name is properties. All right. So yesterday we saw how we could have methods inside the class. Let's take a class today which has some data members. Right. Now, one more thing that I'd like you to be, like you to follow out here is, I saw some of you all, doing this itself. Like for example, right? And how do you call display now? What do you need to do? Supposing you had to call display, what would you do for display?
Create
an object
program class.
So create an object of the program class. So program, let's say P is equal to new program and P dot display, right? So I saw you all writing code in this manner, wherein in main you made an object of the same class. Now, while this is syntactically okay and logically also okay, and there's no problem about it, what I find is that when you use this approach, certain concepts of yours gets muddled up, right? So what you're doing here is, in your own class, you're having a main and calling that code. Now, I don't want you to use this approach. The reason being that the person who creates the class and the person who creates the object of the class need not always be the same person. So in a project, for example, you may be creating one class, but you may not be creating an object of the class. Somebody else would be creating an object of your class. So the class developer and the person who's using the class is not always the same entity. There could be two separate people, right? Now, when you write code like this, you're the person who's creating the class and you're the person who's also creating an object of the class within the same class. There are certain key concepts that you learn as you go along. These will get muddled up. So for a clear understanding and for a clear distinction between the two, I don't want you to do this. In your class program, I only want you to have the main function. I don't want you to have other non-static content in the class program. It should only contain the main function. And the other class, write it outside class program, not even within class program. I saw some of you making that mistake, that you all wrote that second class within class program. Don't do that. Write it after class program ends. Right? So the second class that you're creating would be created outside. So I would like you to maintain this, not because it is incorrect or whatever what you're doing, not because of that, but because when you're in the learning mode, the concepts that you're learning tend to get muddled up when you do something like this. Okay, so just from your learning point of view, once you're comfortable with the code, then yes, then something like this is not an issue. All right, so let's go back to what we were talking about. Yesterday we saw how to create methods in your class. All right, let's try creating some data members, some variables out here. So for example, if I create something like this, public int I, all right, now this here is a data member in your class. If you have a public data member in your class, in .NET, this is referred to as a field, right? So variable created at the class level is called as a field. By default, when you create any fields, so at the class level, when you create a variable, these are initialized to their default values by default. So what will happen to I in this case? I would be by default initialized to 0. Right? Let's try accessing this. So class 1 O is equal to new class 1. And if I did O dot, you'll find that this is actually being shown here as a field. Right? So field int class 1 dot I. Then of course you could access it and give it a value of your. Creating fields is fairly simple. All right. Somebody was asking me yesterday that if you don't give an access specifier, then what is the default access specifier? So the default access specifier within a class is private. So if I didn't do this, for example, what will it take it as? By default, it's taking it as private. So this, of course, on the top, it will give you an error. Right? So that's how you could create a field. Now, whenever you create any data in the class, one important thing that you need to ensure is that this data should be validated, or only valid values should be accepted in this data. Currently, when you say public int I, what values can you put in here? You can put in any value that an integer would accept. Okay. But what if I wanted to restrict this value? And I wanted to make sure that only certain values can go in here. Let's say, for example, the value should be less than 100 only. Then how do I ensure that? Right? For example, right now it would take any value, to take 100, 200, 400, whatever. But I want to ensure only less than 100 should be accepted in here. So what could I do in here? What would be your suggestion with the knowledge that you have?
Sir, using setter methods and if else condition.
Correct. So you can have a setter and a getter, right? And in the setter and the getter, you could have an if condition. So help me write a setter getter. In addition to having a setter getter, what would you also need to do?
Private.
The variable that you're declaring needs to be declared as a private variable. So let me try doing this private int x, for example, and help me write a setter for this. Public, yes, setter. Give me a setter first.
Void
So void.
Let's say set x, right? Does it need any parameters?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Integer x.
Right? So let's call this value. Okay, I'll just call this value. And the code in here would be what? Now you first validate what is the value. So if value less than 100, then x is equal to value. Right? Okay. What if it is not correct? What if the value entered was not correct? Typically, what would you do? Typically, you would throw an exception out here. Right? So throw new exception, you could do that. But I am not going to talk about exception handling right now because that we'll keep that in a later session. So for now, I'm not introducing exceptions. But you all know how to throw an exception, throw new exception. You'll know how to do that in any case. So instead of doing that, for now, just for now, I'm going to write a console.writeLine which says invalid value for x. Right? That's my setup. Now, when you are making it private, it's no longer going to be accessible from an object of that class. So you would say o.x is no longer available. But what is available, of course, is set x, and to which you could put in a value. So for example, if I gave it a valid value, this would work fine. Right? This would work fine for a valid value. Right? Didn't give any error. But if I given a value 100 or more than 100, right? It says invalid value for x. Okay. I can't print this value right now. If I try doing this, of course, I don't have o.x is not available to me. So to print the value, I would need to have a method that returns a value from it. So that's where your getter would come in. Help me with the getter.
Public
int. Sorry,
Int.
get
X. Any parameters?
No, sir.
No, sir.
No parameters. And in this, all that you'll do is return the value that was there in x. So return x. This is what you're doing out here. Right? So if you had to now run this console.writeLine o.x, sorry, o.getX would give you the value out here. Right? So this is what we have tried doing. If it was not valid, what is the default value for a variable?
0 or integer.
Class level variable is declared as 0 for an integer. All right. What if I gave it a valid value? Then that should work. Then that code should work. Then it should take it as 10. Okay. All right. So you use the setter and the getter before in other languages. You know how that works. Now, what is the setter and getter for? It is actually a wrapper function for the variable that you have out here. Now, what if I wanted to write code like this? Let's say o.I is equal to, let's say plus o.I plus o.I plus minus o.I minus o.I. Okay, let's assume I had to do something like this. But instead of doing it for I wanted to do it for x. I wanted to write it for x. Now I can't do it directly with x. Correct? So how do I write down this code for x?
o.set get x.
So we have to use setter and getter method.
Yeah, so I'm asking you for the syntax.
O.set I.
Set x.
Set x.
Yeah.
Equal to.
Equal to.
No, we have to put the value.
Yeah.
We have to pass the value.
So
Okay, correct.
Sir, put it in a variable and that variable to
No,
set
without
it.
using a variable. For every thing that you have to access, you don't need to create a variable.
++ o dot get x.
You can't do a ++ o dot get x. This won't work because o dot get x will return not a variable, it will return a number, and then you can't do a ++ on that.
So
O
can
dot
we
get
write
x is returning a
o
value.
dot set x? Can we write o dot set x, and in the bracket we can write the value which we are passing?
No, I don't get what you're saying.
So instead of writing get x,
hard-coded value.
yes,
Give a
sir.
hard-coded value. But no, I don't want to do that. I want to
Okay.
use the variable x.
Sir, taking the o dot get x into bracket.
O dot get x in bracket.
And then incrementing it.
Then incrementing. Okay. So let's see whether this works. It didn't solve anything because o dot get x is returning not a variable. No? The ++ can be operated, can work on a variable, not on a, you can't say ++10. Agree?
Yes, sir.
So first thing is, can it be done with, if I give you, let's say 15-20 minutes to think about it, can it be done? Can it be done? It can be. There is a, so what you have to first do is, you have to first do o dot get x and then pass +1 to o dot set x. Okay, o dot get x +1 you have to pass to o dot set x. Then you have to add o dot get x again +1 again, so it becomes a little complex. It's not that it's not possible, but it becomes very complex to think of. So given enough time, you would be able to do it. It's not that you cannot do it. It's just that it will take a lot of time to try to figure out this. So the problem with your setters and getters is that even though your setters and getters work, the moment you have to use them in expressions, the moment you have to use them in calculations, the setters and getters are very inconvenient to use. It's not easy to use them. Your code becomes extremely critical and difficult to sort of debug or difficult to read, very cryptic code. That was the word I was looking for. So in .NET, there is a better way of doing this. Instead of writing a setter and a getter, we are going to create a property. We're going to create a property. So let's see how we can create a property. A property is a combination of a get and a set. So what is a property in .NET? A property is nothing else but a combination of a get and a set. And it acts as a wrapper for a variable. So whenever you want to assign a value to the variable, you will assign it through the property. Whenever you want to retrieve the value for the variable, you will read it through the property. Are we clear on this? Now, let's see how we could do this. I'll create a different class so that there's some difference out here. Right? And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to write this variable x, but I'm going to create it with a property instead of a setter getter. Let's say private int x. This is the data that you want to access, and this is the data that you want to write validation code for. Now, to create a property, the private here changes to public. Look at the syntax, public int x. So far it is like writing a variable. right? So far it is like writing a variable, but instead of giving a semicolon there, you give in curly brackets. Okay, you give in curly brackets, and in the curly brackets you would have your set and your get. Okay, get is giving an error because you haven't written anything. So let's write the set first. Now, this, by the way, is a convention. Okay, it's not a rule or whatever. It's a convention. Convention meaning what? It's not compulsory to do that. But if your variable is called, small variable, your property will begin with the capital letter. So variables are declared using small lowercase. Properties are declared using the first letter capital. Okay, so let's have a look at this. Now, when would this code be called? When would the set be called? Whenever you create an object of this class. So let me create another main. Right. Instead of class 1, I'll create class 2. Whenever I create an object of that class, and if I did O dot, I will notice that X here is shown as a property. This is a symbol for a property. So O dot X equal to some value. Whenever you write down this line of code, it will go and call the set for your property. Okay, automatically. You don't have to do anything. This is how the compiler is understanding this. The moment you say O dot X equal to 10, this is where it's going into the set. Now, whatever is being passed out here, what is being passed out here in this case? What is the value that I'm passing?
So 10.
10. Whatever value I'm passing is received here as a keyword called value. The value is the, I don't want to, is the right hand side of O dot X is equal to 10. Whatever is you're passing the right hand side is being received here as a keyword called value. And the code that you'll write, you will first check for this. So you will check for what? If value less than 100, then what do I do in this case? If it's a valid value, then what do I do?
X is equal to X.
Which X?
Small x.
Small x.
So small x is equal to value. Right? And in the else part, console.writeLine, whatever, invalid value. Right? If you notice this code, it's identical or similar to what we wrote earlier. Right? What we wrote earlier in your setter, we are writing similar code here in this set. The only difference here is what? Here it was receiving this as a parameter, but here you don't need to pass the parameter. Value is what is being passed to you by default. It's a keyword. Are we clear on this? Any questions about the set? All right. So let's get down to the get. When would the get be called? When would the get be called? If I try to read the value. So for example, if I try to do console.writeLine O.X, when I try to read the value, this is what would cause the get to happen. And in the get, all that we're doing here is what? Return X.
Value.
Not value. Value was only for the set. The word value is only available in the set when you're assigning it up. You have validated the value and stored it where? You've stored it into the variable X. So whatever you have last stored in X, that is what I'm written. So you'll notice that this is exactly the same as the earlier code, what you wrote in the getX. So what you wrote in getX Here, same thing I'm writing now. No changes there. Are we clear on this? Everybody? Okay, so what's happening on this line? What is getting called on this line? The set gets called on this line. And on this line, what is getting called? The get will get called on this line. Okay. So if you notice, by writing a property, even though you're writing functions, what does the property consist of? There are two functions. So there is a set and there is a get. Even though you're writing a function, you continue to use it like a variable. You understand what I'm saying? The syntax that you're using is similar to using a variable, but you're getting the benefit of writing a function. So it's like the best of both worlds. Much better than using a setter and a getter. Let's try doing this. Let me just run it first and give you the output there. So the value came out as 10. What if I had passed the invalid value to it? What will it do now in this case? First, it'll go into the else part and show you the message. And then, of course, it will print this as 0. Are we clear on this?
Yes.
Let me put this into breakpoint, into a break mode, and show you how the code is running. Now, to put a breakpoint in your code, all that you need to do is go and click here on the left hand side. So this is like a toggle. If you look at this gray area out here, this gray line out here, you just come and click here, and it adds that red dot out there, and that line is highlighted in sort of maroon. And it's a toggle. So you can either turn on a breakpoint or remove a breakpoint. Same way here, I'm adding a breakpoint here, so not here. I'm adding a breakpoint here, and I'm adding a breakpoint here. Okay. Let's run this code. So I ran it as usual. Now it waits for me to, go stepwise. So to go to the next step, there's an option here which says step into. So F11 would be going to the next line. The shortcut key is F11. So I'm saying step into, and it takes you to the next line. So where is it taking you from here? Taking you to the set. Now I'm pressing F11 here, one at a time, one line at a time. It comes to this part. What does value now contain? Value now containing the value that you have passed out there, which was 1000 in this case. So if value less than 100 goes into the else part. Comes back here when you try to do console.writeline o.x is going into the get, and whatever the last value in x had the value of 1000. Sorry, 0. It didn't accept it. So it would return x out here. Right? And that's how you got your output. If you are to run it with a valid value, let me try giving in a valid value. So let me pass a 10 to this. Now in this case, it will go into the if again function, the F11 function key. So value in this case was 10. It's less than 100, so it goes into x equal to value. Then when you try to read the value, it goes back and returns the value. All right. Questions, if any?
Sir, that capital X represents like it is a get and set method.
It is a property. Call it a property.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So property is a very important concept in .NET. Wherever you are writing your data, instead of writing it as fields, you will be writing them as properties. Okay.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
So suppose instead of x, my variable length is length means of instead of x, it is like
So let's say you have a class called student.
yes, sir.
And if your data that in there, you wanted to store the roll number.
Roll number, yeah.
Okay, so supposing the class name was student, let's say this was student, and this was roll number. So the variable, you will call it this way. So starting with small letters, roll number, but the property you will call it first letter caps.
Okay, that's what.
Right. In .NET, all your functions, classes, anything that is public, for example, would be in proper case, first letter capitals. Okay. Like if you see write line, console.writeLine. So W capital and L capital. But if you have a private variable, then it begins with a small letter.
Okay, sir.
And this is the convention. It is not a rule. Okay. It's not that you have to, you have to do it that way. It's a convention, but please follow conventions. It's easier to read your code then. If you're working in a large team and if you're the only one not following conventions, then it'll be difficult for the others to follow what you're trying to do.
Yes, sir. Sir, means suppose if I want to get set value for the private variable, then my syntax should be like the way you said earlier, means for just using properties, small
Correct.
and caps, or should I give any other name which I think?
No.
Okay.
Use this convention.
Okay,
So
sir.
any data that you have would be represented as a property, wherein there will be a private variable and there will be a property which has the get in the set. Any data that has validations, you would put it that way.
Yes, sir. Okay.
All right. Are we clear on this, everybody? Then I can take it further
Yes.
unless you have any questions on this. All right. Now, if you notice value out here, what did it take value as?
Integer value.
Integer. Now, why did it take it as an integer? It took it as an integer because the property was an integer, right? But what if instead of an integer, the property was a string, for example? What if this was a string? Now, in this case, look at what value is taking it as.
String value.
String value. Or if, for example, if you had a different data type, let's say, for example, if this is a Boolean, then value now here is taken as a Boolean. So depending upon what the property is, right? Depending upon what the property is, the value will be automatically taking that data type. It changes based on what is the data type of the property. So if you had to, instead of an integer, if you had to create a string property, the logic that you'll use would be exactly the same. The keyword again would be used would be value. The only difference is that if you're using a string, then value would be a string. If you're using, let's say, another type of property, then the value changes accordingly. All right. Let's try something else. Let's create other properties. Okay, before we do that, I forgot to do that, but using a property, could we have used this sort of syntax? Supposing now I have my property, can I use this sort of syntax instead of o.I? Could I say o.x is equal to plus o.x plus o.x plus plus? Can I use that? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Right? So you'll find that syntactically, even though you're using functions, syntactically you can use it like a variable. So it's like much easier to use. Okay, so try out doing that and see what the answer comes out as. All right, now I have another question for you. Supposing I want to create another property. Help me create a property. Let's call this property P1 for property 1. So if I have to create a property, what is the first thing I need to do? Every property will have what? A set and a get, yes, but what will it also have?
Field.
Sorry? Every
So
property,
field.
Value.
correct. You'll have a variable, a field, a variable. Fields are generally public, variables are called fields. Otherwise, you just call them a variable or data member. So for example, if I had this, I would start with private int P1, let's say. P1 is just any property. Instead of P1, can we make it, instead of int, can we make it a string? Just to try it out. Okay, let's try making this one a string. And then how do I create the property? Help me. Give me the syntax.
Public string, P1,
String.
Public
capital P1.
string, and then the convention used would be starting with capital letters. All right, and this has a get in a set. Correct? Okay, with validations out there. Now my question to you is slightly different. My question to you is, if I wanted to create a read-only property, how do I create a read-only property?
By making set private.
Correct. So if you have a read-only property, the set would not be there. You don't put in a set. You only put in what?
Get.
A get. And when you put in a get out here, the user would be able to, the person who's using a class would be able to call the value to read the value, but not be able to assign a value. So give me the code in here. Return what?
P1.
Which P1? Small P1 or
Small
capital?
P1.
Small P1. So always remember to use the variable here. Don't use the property. Otherwise it will become a recursive endless loop. It will give you a stack overflow. So return P1. That's what. So this is, I've created a read-only property.
So, but first won't we have to set the property as in like password or something? So we will have to set the property first, and then afterwards we can read it.
That can be done by your code in maybe either one possibility is you can put in a hard-coded value here, right? That could be one way of doing it. Second way of doing it is you could write code in the constructor. I have not shown you a constructor, but you know how to write a constructor.
Yes, sir.
Write a constructor wherein you initialize the members. So that can be done. Okay. So here in this case, the only thing that will be allowed would be the reading the value, but not setting it. So if I try doing this now, and if I try doing O dot P1 equal to some value, right? This gives me a compilation error saying that this is a read-only property. But what would be allowed here would be what? What can I do here? Console.writeLine O dot P1. So you could actually create read-only properties in this.
So what if we use a small P1 to call them O dot small P1? It will show error.
So would it work? Would it work?
No.
No, sir.
Yeah. Why would it not work? Because you made it as private.
Sir, by default, the access modifier is private. So do we need to give private?
You don't need to, but I always like to.
Okay, sir.
Okay, because readability increases. I'm not, what if, for example, I'm not saying it will happen. What if tomorrow the access modifier, they say in .NET version 7 by default has changed to something else? What if they do that? They will not do that. But what if they do that? Then what will happen to all the previous code that you have written? Suddenly it will change its meaning. So even though it's not required in certain cases, I like to do it from two aspects. One is readability. I'm clear about what it is. Second, maintainability. If in future, even if my code changes, then my, if the rules change, my code should not change. Okay. Yeah. So this is how you could create a read-only property. Now, I'll ask you the question, but I can't think of a reason why you would need to do this. if you have to create a write-only property, a property that can be only changed by the user but cannot be read, then what do you do in that case?
Set property.
Only set.
Only set and don't put in a get, right? But in all my years of coding, I have not come across a situation where you will need to put in a write-only property in actual real-life projects and whatnot. I have not felt the need to do that. But if you wanted to do that, that is how you would do it. Right. Let's take another property. Private int p2 and public int p2. Right? Okay. Now, what if this property did not have any validations? What would be the code in here? If there were no validations, what would be the code?
P2 is equal to value.
P2 equal to value.
Value. Correct. And similarly here, what would you do?
Return P2.
Return P2. Now my question to you is this. Instead of writing a property like this, which has no validations, can I directly use something like this? Public int, let's say P3, for example. Okay. So instead of creating a property that has no validations, instead of that, can I use a field? Can I use a field?
It will act as a variable.
Yeah, it is a variable. My question to you is this. I have written code in this manner, and I also have written code in this. Other than the name of course is different. Are the two the same? Are the two similar?
Sir, if there is a known, if we are not giving its validation, then what is the use to make it private?
That is my question.
Instead of making private, we should.
That is my question. Yeah, that is my question to you. So what do you think? Are they similar in this case?
Yes, sir, we could say it.
Yeah, they're solving the same purpose, right? So like I interrupted him, but what he was saying was that why did we go in for a property? The point he was making is that why did we go for a property? We went for a property because what?
So giving access, like specific access.
Because we wanted validations.
Sorry.
Right? Because we wanted validations. We wanted that, the data that's coming in should be first validated and then should be accepted into our class. So instead of keeping a public variable directly, we said we'll write a property where we can write your code also for validating the data. So why have properties? Core reason, one reason for having properties is to have validations on your data. Now, in this case, there are no validations. So between the two, are they two, doing a similar task? Are both doing a similar task right now? Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
So between the two, which would you prefer?
P3.
The one which is a field or a property? The field would be an easier option. Would be firstly shorter code. Secondly, faster code. No overhead of a function call. Right? So in this case, P3 appears to be the better option and is the better option. Okay. But even if you have a situation like this, .NET recommends that you still have a property. So what is .NET saying? That even if you want to write a field and you want to, have no validations on that, even if that is the case, they recommend that you write a property. So why they recommend that? What are the reason for doing that? First reason is when you create an object of your class, and if you said O dot, right, you'll find that some of them appear as properties and some of them appear as fields. Some of them appear as properties and some of them appear as fields. So for sameness, so that there is, common look and feel everywhere, they're saying that don't keep it as a field, keep it as a property. First reason. Second reason, from a maintainability point of view, they're saying, let's say in the future, there are some validations added to this one. If you have to add validations to this, you have to change the whole meaning. You'll have to change the entire structure. But if you have to add validations to this, it's very easy to add validations. Not just that, if you wanted to, for example, in future, make it read only. Very easy to make it read only out. All right. So just purely from the maintainability point of view, and for making sure that in future, if there are changes that come in, these can be taken care of, they are suggesting. So two reasons. One is standardization, that everything is a property instead of some properties and some fields. Second thing is from future maintenance point of view. Are we clear on this? So it won't be wrong if you did line number 88. It won't be wrong. They're not saying you cannot do it, but it's a recommendation that preferably keep it as a property, right? So going ahead, any data that you have in a class, even if it doesn't have validations, what is the recommendation? That keep it as a property rather than as a field. Okay. Now, if that is the case, it would mean that instead of writing one line of code here, you would write about what? I don't know, 10, 12 lines of code. Line number 76 to line number 87. So about 12 lines of code. Instead of writing one line of code, you're writing 12 lines of code. So they're going to suggest, or their .NET suggests that we'll make it easy for you. Instead of having to write 12 lines of code, we will give you an easier syntax for properties that do not have validations. And such properties that do not have validations can be written in this manner. Check this out. Public int p4, I'm calling it. Get, set, get, set, any order. That doesn't matter. This here is an example of an automatic property, or also called as an auto property. Either an automatic, or in short, they call it auto also sometimes. Now, in an automatic property, you will not write any code whatsoever. The compiler generates the code for the get and the set, and it also generates a private variable for you. Remember, every property requires what? Every property requires a private variable, right? So if you're creating a property, every property is requiring a private variable. So here I'm saying that what all does the compiler do for you for automatic property? It generates the property, it generates the get and the set code, and the variable also, which you need, is generated out here for you. Are we clear on this? The syntax for using it is the same. There's no change in the syntax. You use it. How would you use this? How do you write down code for this? Simply O dot P4 is equal to some value, whatever. Right, or console.writeLine O dot P4. What is happening when you call this code? This is calling the set and this is calling the get. Right? That's what's happening. Questions, if any?
Sir,
Yes.
so can we also say that we can give controlled access, like if we write it as a property, then we can give controlled access? So as in,
I mean, I'm not understanding the phrase that you're using, controlled access. What
like,
are you trying to say?
as in we will have to write get method for getting the variable value, right? So like anybody
Yeah,
who
so there is an extra, protection level where you are not accessing the variable directly, but you are accessing it through either the set or the get. So yes, if you want to call that as controlled access, then yes. If that's what you understand by controlled access, then yes.
So is it the correct definition of controlled access or not?
I don't know what controlled access means.
Okay, sir.
There is no object-oriented term called controlled access. Controlled access is an English phrase, which is why I asked you for your interpretation of the English phrase.
Okay, sir.
Like, for example, if you ask me, is it providing polymorphism? I mean, the polymorphism is an object-oriented term. But controlled access is not necessarily an object-oriented term. So that's why I asked you your interpretation of what you mean by it.
Yes, sir. Fine.
All right. Are we clear on automatic properties, everybody?
Sir,
Yes.
so can you once again explain what is the difference between P3 and P4? I'm getting confused.
Between P3 and P4. Between P3 and 4.
Yes, sir. Public and P3.
This is a field. This is a variable.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Yes, sir.
This is a property which has a get and a set, which you're not writing the code for the get and the set. Who's generating the code?
It is compiler who is generating.
The compiler is generating the code for this. So instead of having to write code like this, if you look at compare P4 to P2. Compare P4 to P2.
Yes, sir.
P4 and P2 are similar. P3 is different.
Yes, sir. So, I mean, why are we using P4 when we can define the field?
When we can define it as P3.
Yes.
You can define it as P3. There's no harm.
No. I mean, when we are having a field, then why do we need to define a property?
That's what I'm saying. I'm agreeing with you. You can keep it as a field. There's no problem about it. You can keep it as a field. It will work the same way with a field or a property which has no validation. Both will work the same way. Field will be faster. Field will be shorter. Field will be faster. Field will be better. So I'm agreeing with you. But .NET says don't keep a field. .NET says we know it is faster. We know it is better. But for standardization, don't keep it that way. Because you will end up with a class that has some fields and some properties. You get what they're trying to say? They're saying that it is not necessary that everybody will have validations. So you will end up with some fields and some properties. Will be difficult to understand and maintain your code. Tomorrow, if you want to add some validations to that field, if you want to add validations to P3, what do you need to do? In future, you'll have to convert it to a property.
Yes, sir.
So which means there'll be wholesale changes. So they're saying to take care of that, to begin with, only keep it as a property. So they're not saying that it's better. They're not saying. In fact, I'm telling you that using a property is a bigger overhead than using a field. Fields are better. But in spite of them being better, from a standardization point of view and for future maintenance point of view, they are willing to sacrifice that. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Again, it's not a rule, it's a convention. Conventions can be broken. So if your project manager says, no, to hell with them, make it a field, make it a field. All right. Okay, I was trying to get this, but I don't have the other project open, so I'm writing it down. So what happens in the automatic property? First thing is get and set code is generated by the compiler. And also the private variable is generated by the compiler. Now, when should you use automatic property? Yeah.
No validation required.
Perfect. Right. So that's when you'd use a automatic property. All right. I've shown you how to call that automatic property. Let's run this once and see the output. So that's your last one, is your automatic property. Now, this part, wherein we are saying that get and set is generated by the compiler, private variable is generated by the compiler. Let me show you how this is actually happening. Right. So what we're going to do is we're going to go behind the scenes a little bit. And we're going to go and check our assembly. And we're going to see how this code is generated in the assembly. So I've said that it generates, the compiler generates it. Let's go into the assembly and see how it looks. And to do that, I'm going to use a utility called the IL disassembler. So this is a command line utility that I'll be using. And the IL disassembler allows you to see what is there inside an assembly, including the IL code that is generated for all the methods that you have out here. So let's open that. Now to open that, make a note of it because you'll be trying it in the lab later on your own. Look out for the developer command prompt for Visual Studio 2019. Open the developer command prompt for Visual Studio 2019. Okay. So this is running a command listing, but with certain paths and certain other settings already set out here. At the command line, type out ILDAS. Right. ILDASM is short form for IL disassembler. Right. Sorry. Okay. I'm not sure whether that's directed at me. I think probably by mistake. Okay. So in the ILDASM, you say file open and go to your project wherever you have saved it. Okay. That's where my folder is. Now, what was day 2? If you looked at day 2, what was day 2? Day 2 was the name of your solution. Under day 2, what is properties? What is properties? Project name. Under the project name, there will be a bin folder. Inside the bin folder, there is a debug folder, and that's where your assembly is created. So remember this path. Project name bin/debug. And if you look at the assembly, it has an extension of .exe. Why does it have an extension of exe?
So it's an executable file.
Assembly.
No.
Compiler
Not because it is
convert.
an executable file. So yesterday we talked about the difference between an assembly that is an exe and a DLL.
You can directly run it.
Yes. So it has an entry point defined. The main function is there. So you need to have a main function in here, and that is the entry point. You can directly run this. On the other hand, a DLL will not have an entry point, meaning a DLL will not have a main function in there. So you can't run the DLL directly. So anyway, so properties.exe, this is my assembly, and I'm opening this assembly. So first thing is, it shows you what's there in the manifest, right? These are all the things that are there in the manifest. This is an IL format, so a lot of it may not make a lot of sense to you, all right? Properties. Now, what are these properties here? Let's correlate this to. What is the first thing out here? Properties. What is this here? That's your namespace. Then you had what? 3 classes in there. Program, and then class 1 and class 2, right? Now class 2 is where I have actually created it. So look at class 2. Okay, let's start with private int x. What has this been stored here as private int x? Can you identify where it has got stored? Out here, right? So what does int x become? Int has been changed to
In 32.
What is int 32?
Data type.
The CTS data type,
Common data.
right? So whatever data type that you're using in C#, this is getting converted into the CTS data type. Then you had the public int x. This is your property which had 2 methods, the set and the get. So you will find that there is a set x and then there is a get x here, right? Set x and get x. These are the 2 methods that it has generated. If you double click on this, it actually shows you the IL for this, right? Again, I don't expect you to make any sense of the IL. I don't expect you to know what is the IL or learn the IL or whatever. But just as a point of view of seeing what is there, you can open it and see it and see how it looks. So that's your getX. And you'll find that similar things have been generated for the others as well. So P1 only had the get, it didn't have the set. And then the variables also are declared out here. All right. Similarly, P2, P3. I am most interested in P4. That is what I wanted to actually show you all. So P4, you will find that there is a get P4 and a set P4. Now in the get and set, see what it's using. See what it's using. It's using this P4 K underscore backing field. So this P4 K underscore backing field is the private variable that has been created for you. Right? We said that the compiler will generate the code for the set get and also generate the the variable that is used out here. Now the variable is not accessible in the code, but you can actually see in the IL it has actually gone and generated this. Are we clear on this? So this is the basics of a automatic property. This is how you can actually use an automatic property. Wherever you're using variables, instead of using variables, use properties, right? And if your property does not have validations, you can go ahead and create an automatic property. All right. I'm going away from ILDSM. All right. Any questions, any doubts about properties? Okay. Now what I'm going to do next is, we didn't get a chance to do this yesterday. We had only one project in the solution. I'm going to add one more project in the same solution. Right? So this code would remain, but I would also be able to add on other code. So what I'll be doing every day is, creating one solution with different projects. When you open my solution, you will get to see all my projects. So to do that, right click on the solution and choose add a new project. When you add a new project here, it again asks you for what type of project you want to go in for. So in this case, I want to go in for a console app. Okay, project name I've given it is constructors and object initializers. Right. Now, let me copy paste some code from a class that I already have. Okay, so I have P1, P2, P3, P4, and X. I have these properties out here. Let me define a constructor in here. Okay, now before we do anything further, if I run this code, right, look at my solution explorer. Any guesses which project will run first? Just by looking at it, can you figure out which project is going to run first? Just by looking at it, can you figure out? There are two projects, constructors and object initializers and properties. So which one would run first?
Properties.
Because you can make out visually by seeing it that it is shown in bold. Okay. Now, if I want this one to run first, there are different ways of doing this. One possibility is you can come here in the, in the toolbar here, and instead of properties, make constructors and object initializers as the startup object. You can do that here. Okay. Second possibility, you can do that from here also. You can right click on this and choose set as startup project. You can do it from here also. So like this also you can do it. Right click and set as startup project instead of doing it from here. The third possibility is you can right click on the solution, go into the properties for the solution, and there you can specify the startup project, whichever one you want as the startup project. Okay. Now, when you do this, again, I'll show you what I'm doing. Right click on the solution and go into the properties. There's another option available here which says that current selection. So instead of saying that only one project will start off, always the same project, you can say current selection. Now, when you choose current selection, whichever file is open, supposing now this file is open, the project that it is open in will run first. So for example, if this file was open, then this project will run first. But if this file was open, then this project will run first. So you can keep it according to how you want it, whatever way you find convenient, you can use it that way. I have kept it as what? I've kept it as current selection. So whichever file is currently open, that is the one that will run for me. That is the project that will run for me. All right, so let's try creating a constructor out here. Okay, before I do that, I should have shown you this there also. It skipped my mind. Okay, so you remember the earlier project of ours, we had not created a constructor in there. Had we created any constructor in the previous project?
No, sir.
No.
No, sir.
No, sir.
Right. But if you come down to this, you'll find that there is a CTOR here. CTOR here is your constructor that is already created for you. So what is this showing you actually? What is this trying to tell you, or what am I trying to ask you out here? What
Default
concept?
constructor.
Default constructor.
Default constructor.
Yeah, so this is the default constructor
created by
created for
compiler.
every class. In every class that you create, if you don't create a constructor, it adds a constructor for you. So you'll find that every class has its own default constructor created if you don't create a constructor. If you create even one constructor, then the default constructor is not created for you. So, that's what I wanted to show you. Now here in this case, I am creating a constructor of my own, in which case the compiler will not generate a constructor. Let me put in a console.writeline saying that constructor called, no param constructor called. All right. Why do we use a constructor? What do we use a constructor for? Why do we need it?
To initialize non-static variable.
Correct. To initialize class members. So for example, if I have different properties here, X, P1, P2, P3, P4, I could actually initialize those members here to some default values. So X is equal to whatever, let's say 10. P1 is equal to, P1 is what? Is it a string? Yeah. P1 is equal to some blank string, or X, for example. P2 is equal to, and why is this giving an error? Okay, it's a read-only property, so I can't do that directly here. I'll explain other ways of creating, setting this value. But for now, I will not set this value here. What I can do here is instead refer to the variable P1 is equal to X. Okay. What is the difference between this and this? What am I using when I'm using this? What am I using when I'm using this? When I'm using line 20,
Property.
line number 20 is trying to use the property. But line number 21 is using the variable directly. Similarly, P3 is equal to 30, whatever, right? And P4 is equal to 40. So initial values can be passed out here. Right? Let's try calling this class 2 O is equal to new class 2. Right? Let's call this O1. And if I try doing console.writeline O1 dot and any of the properties, let me just print one of them. You can try it out for the others. Right? When I do this, this should show me the value of what I have set in the constructor. So console.readline. Let's try running this. So I think I'd set it to 40. That will be the initial value that would be set out. Now, of course, you can overload the constructor. So instead of doing this, you could also do what? You could, take these as values from the user. Int X. Okay, let me call it by different names. Okay, int A, comma, string B, comma, int C, comma, int D, comma, int E. The code in here would now change to what? X is equal to A, P1 is equal to B, P2 is equal to C, and so on and so forth. Right? And this would be the parameterized constructor code. How do I call that? Create that object. What would I need to do? Class 2 O2 is equal to new class 2. Instead of new class 2 being passed as no parameters, I'm passing them with the different values that I've got out here. So let's say 10, comma, A, comma, whatever. Okay, I could do it this way. And if I try doing this now, similarly, let's say O2 dot P4, this would now give me the value that I have set out here, which was 14. Right. So you got this out here. Now the one suggestion and one problem that I have here is when you're calling this, it just shows you A, B, C, D, E. So you don't know which property you're actually setting it into. It becomes very difficult to read this. So somebody who's using an object of your class is not sure about what properties he's actually setting. So what will be a better option here? Instead of A, B, C, D, E, this would be what? What would you like to use out here? Would be the property name itself. Right? In this case, let's say X. This becomes P1. This becomes P2, and so on and so forth. This becomes a lot simpler to understand when you're calling that. So if you look at this now, it shows you X and then P1, P2, P3, P4. So you know which property is being set in here. Now that of course means that you need to change this code also. So X is equal to, I can't do X, right? I can't do this X is equal to X, because when you say X is equal to X, this X here is referring to the variable that you have got in the constructor, the local variable that you have here. It's actually referring to this, the parameter that you have passed out here. So when you have a situation like this, you need to say that this is the class level variable by using this dot X. This of course refers to this is a reference to the current object. Similarly here, this would also change to what? This dot P1 is equal to P1, right? Here, in fact, you didn't need this because of, they're being different. You could have directly said only P1. Similarly, this dot P2 is equal to P2, and so on and so forth. Right. So first thing is your code has become easier for the user and more readable, and it's easier for you to understand also. Instead of calling it A, B, C, D, E, what property is being set. This is the standard way in which you'll be writing code for most constructors. This dot property equal to the value that you got out here from the parameter. And this parameter name also should match the one, the property name that you have out here. So keep it standard. Don't give in names like A, B, C, D, E. Right? Given the same names out here, it becomes easier to read code. Are we clear on this? So now, of course, there's no difference in the way in which the output runs, but this is actually a little better way of writing. All right. Now, supposing I wanted to have a constructor that takes either 5 parameters here, or 4, or 3, or 2, or 1, or 0, and give the user the flexibility of creating the object in any way. One possibility, of course, is you write those many different constructors. So you overload them and you write those many different constructors. So if I've got 5 properties, I would need to have 6 constructors. One which takes 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then 0. Those many constructors. So that's one approach that you can use. What would be a better approach than that? Instead of having to write 6 different constructors, what would be a better approach?
Optional parameter is equal to.
Right. So you give in a single constructor with what saying is equal to what? What is that called?
Equal to J.
When you're saying this is equal to this, what are you using out here? What is this called?
Name.
Not named.
No, sir, position.
Default value.
Default values.
Default values. Yeah.
All right. You create, a constructor, a single constructor, and give it default. So wherever you're writing that code, instead of having to write multiple versions of the constructor, please use only a single constructor which has default values. While giving the default values, make sure that the values that you are giving as the default value out there is a valid value. For example, if your code says what, that this value should be less than 100, and if my default value is 200, then what will happen? If the code here says that the value should be less than 100, my default value is 200, it means that you yourself are giving a wrong value. So given a value, given a default value, that is a valid value. And that's what you would do for working with this. So later in the day, I'm going to give you a small assignment to work on, and which would test this concept out. Okay, so I'd like to see how you all are doing on that. Are we clear on these two points that we have discussed? What have I said? First thing is, instead of writing multiple constructors, what is the better option?
Default
Right?
value.
One constructor with default values. That takes care of all possibilities. Second thing is, the default value itself that you're giving should be a valid value that you're putting, based on the code that you're putting in your properties. If your property says, for example, it should be greater than 0, then your default value cannot be 0. Okay, given a valid value. So that's something that you can try out on your own. All right. Now, let's call this class 3. Okay, so let's assume you had a constructor out here for a class, which initialized this, and you wanted to create an object of this class. Okay, let's assume you wanted to create an object of this class. So I just make this my main one, and now in this case, the only way you can create an object of the class is by calling the no param constructor. You don't have an option out here. What if you wanted to set properties after that? What would you need to do in this case? This class 3, has only one constructor. Does not have a constructor that takes parameters. So if I'd like to set values for this, what will I need to do? After creating the object, what will I need to do? I want to initialize values. So help me. What would I do here? O1 dot
X.
X is equal to some value. Right. Similarly, O1 dot P1 equal to some value, and so on and so forth. So I could actually go and set values in this manner. Right, and I could do that for the others as well. What is the problem with P1? It's the read-only property. So I can't do it for P1. Let me do it for P2. O1 dot P3 equal to some value, and so on and so forth. So this is the only way in which you could write down the code. Now, if you look at this code, it's becoming pretty lengthy code. I mean, to create an object and to give it initial values, we have spent about 5 lines of code in this case. Now, the same thing can be shortened to a single line of code using an object initializer. An object initializer would be used when you don't have a constructor taking all the values. Supposing you have a constructor that takes the initial values, then use the constructor. Then there is no need to use an object initializer. But in the situation wherein you don't have a constructor that takes the initial values, instead of writing longer code like this code can be shortened to a single line using a object initializer. So let's see how this same code, line numbers 23 to 28 to 27, how these same lines can be shortened to one single line of code. See what I'm doing here? I'm saying class 3 O2 is equal to new class 3, and with that I give in curly brackets. So when I'm giving the curly brackets, this here, the curly brackets here is your object initializer. Right? So this part here, this is called as your object initializer. And in the object initializer, see what I'm doing. As soon as I start typing this, it gives me options out here. So what is it giving me here now? Same things that I did earlier. I'm going to set out here. So x is equal to 10. What else? I don't have P1 because that's read only. So P2 is equal to 20, comma, same way. P3 is equal to 30 and P4 is equal to 40. All right. So this is a shorter way. It's not replacing a constructor. What is this line? Line number 30, the replacement for what? Line numbers 23 to 27. Now, when you call this x is equal to 10, if you look at this, first thing what will get called? What is this part here? What will get called here?
Constructor.
Constructor. This part here, the highlighted part here is the constructor getting called. So that will work like normal. After that, in the object initializer, what are you doing? X is equal to 10. What will this call? What will this call? Come on.
Setter method.
Correct. The set for x. Similarly, what will this call? Come on. It's simple. Setter for P2. So what I'm trying to show you here is that this code runs exactly the same as this code. The code does not run any quicker or any better. But what is better? What is easier for us as a programmer? Instead of writing multiple lines, you are now expressing it in a single line. That's the benefit of using object initializer. Just from a coder's perspective, it's an easier way of writing the code. Are we clear on this?
Yes, sir.
Now, I could have used this in different ways. Do I need to pass all the properties? Yeah. Do I have to pass all the properties?
No.
No, I can pass whatever properties I need. Look at a alternate way of expressing it. Now, if your constructor doesn't take any parameters, you can actually eliminate the parentheses for the constructor. Look at line numbers 30 and 32. 30 and 32. Compare the two. What have I done here? The parentheses for the constructor I have eliminated because the constructor didn't take any parameters. And I've directly given the object initializer. So this is also an acceptable syntax. Is this a constructor getting called? Is this out here? Is this a constructor or is it different from a constructor? The curly brackets, what are they?
Object initializer.
Object initializer. That's not the constructor, remember. We're not overloading the constructor. We're just calling the object initializer. Are we clear on this? All right. So you can use this when you're writing your code for shorter code. we talked the other day why you should not write code in a destructor, right? So let's just quickly try this out. What if you have a destructor? We don't know when that code will get called. So even if I, for example, in my main, I've created multiple objects, O1, O2, O3, O4. Even if I did this, O1 is equal to null, for example. O2 is equal to null, for example. O3 is equal to null. Right? Now, what I'm trying to show you is that the destructor is not necessarily being called here at this point. Okay. So even though I've set it equal to null and this is unreferenced memory now, the destructor is not going to get called. Okay. It may get called, but not necessary that it will happen on this line. So let's try running this. And those are the 4 constructors called, but no destructor getting called out. Okay. Now I'm going to press enter, and if you're quick, you might just see this. No, you didn't see this. So the destructor didn't really get called out here for this. Now, what Visual Studio does this, is that when your program ends, it actually goes and calls the destructor, goes and calls the garbage collector. Okay. So see what I'm doing out here. I am putting in a console.readline. So I'm trying to make this wait. Now, when I run this program and when I end this program, so when I press enter, the program is going to end. All right. At that point, Visual Studio calls the GC on this. Visual Studio is calling it, not .NET. So when I press enter, see what happens. You need to be quick to see this. So when I run this, my hands are off. All right. It didn't even wait for me to press enter. Why? Because the program has ended. So in that time that the program ends, just whatever you can see, you can see. All right. I'll run that again. And after I press enter the first time, and my hands are going to be off. So the destructor is shown. There should have been 4 destructors, but because the read line is waiting. But it's not going to wait for you to finish that because the program has actually ended. So on the way out, it's showing you that. Okay. Let's run this, and I'll be a little quicker this time. So I'm going to press enter and then multiple enters. Enter, enter, enter. So you saw the destructors. I mean, I pressed enter multiple times, and then you saw the destructors running. So the argument that we made yesterday still is true. Don't write code in the destructor. When we look at interfaces, then we will see how we can write code for, dispose and what is the significance of dispose. So not at this point. All right. Now let me remove this code out here. I'm going to do one more thing. I am explicitly going to go and call the garbage collector. So there's a class called GC, which is giving you access to the garbage collector, and gc.collect is what I'm going to call out here. So gc.collect is actually going and asking the garbage collector to run. Right? Would the destructor be called now on this line? Would it get called now?
No, sir.
No, why not? I'm saying the GC will run now. I'm asking the GC to run. If I'm asking the GC to run, will it go and collect or no? Object is no longer in scope. Will it collect or not?
So we can just request for garbage collection.
No, here we can call it.
Okay.
So I'm telling you, my statement that I made clearly said, I'm going to ask the GC to run at this point.
So then yes.
Right. So let's confirm this. So when you call gc.collect, the destructor ran at this point of time. Okay, but the GC ran and then it went and freed the memory that was no longer being referred. Right? Now, although I can do this, again, the question of can I and should I? Can I do this? Of course, I can do this. Should I do this?
No.
Why not? Why not?
It will slow down the process.
Slow down your process.
Correct. It actually affects your performance. The GC running, while the GC is running, other programs, I mean, the CPU, one thread is being allocated for the GC. So if this thread is running on a single processor CPU, for example, no other code will run while the GC is running. So it's not, speeding up your work in any way. It is actually slowing it down. So leave the garbage collection to whom? To the CLR. You don't worry about that at all. Don't write code in the destructor. Don't call the garbage collector, right? And don't mess around with any of the things that are happening in there. Instead, use a dispose method. We'll see a dispose method at a later point of time. So I'm showing you what it is doing, but also I'm warning you not to use it. All right, let's go ahead. Let's move on to the next topic. I'm adding a new project and I'm going to look at static members in here. Okay. All right. Now, you would have worked with static members before, so I would expect you all to help me with my code and answer me my simple questions that I'm asking. All right. Let's assume I had a non-static, field or a variable, public int I. Now, for the non-static field, for every object that you create, right? Each object has a copy of that non-static field. For example, if I said class 1 O1 and class 1 O2, O1 also has a copy of I and O2 also has a copy of I. So each one has its own, separate data for I, and then you can access it in this way. O1 dot I equal to 100, let's say, and O2 dot I equal to 200. So each one has its own copy of I. Right, and these are separate. If I change O2.I, then it does not change O1.I. On the other hand, if I create a static variable, right? If I create a static variable, there is only a single copy of this static variable created for the entire class. So even if you create a different object, it does not affect the static variable. There's one copy created for the entire class. So there is shared data, common data for all objects, right? So if I now want to access the static variable, I cannot access it with the object level because this is not related to an object. Instead, it will be accessed as a class level variable. So in this case, this would be class 1 dot, and this shows you the static members out. So class 1 dot static I equal to whatever, let's say 1000, for example. All right. All right. So you've seen this before. My question to you is simple. Why have a static variable? Why have a static variable or static data? Why have it? Yes.
For providing common member for
It will
class.
get memory only one time.
Correct. So you want a single copy. You want a single copy of that data, or instead of single, you can call it shared copy of that data, shared data for the entire class, right? Only one copy is created in them. Are you clear on this, everybody? All right. I could also have, let's firstly create a non-static function. I could also have a static function. Right? Again, my question to you is the why. Why have a static function? Yes.
Access static variables.
So we don't need object to call static functions.
Okay.
It will get the.
If you want to share the same functionality for all the objects.
Okay. So I heard different answers, and the answer to that is the middle answer that I got.
For accessing static variables.
So to call the static method, you don't need to create an object of that class. So any methods that are general purpose methods that are not related to object level data, there are general methods that you can just call directly. Such methods would be kept as static methods. So why have a static function? They can be called directly by class name dot method name without creating an object of the class. Right? Right? Without creating an object of the class. So if I had to call this method display, for example, the display method would need to be called from an object. So o1.display. So unless I create an object, I can't call display. But the static method that I've created, which was static display, can be directly called with class name dot method name. I don't need to create an overhead of a object to actually call that method. Are we clear on this? Besides main of course we know is static. Besides main, in .NET, have you seen or used any static method? Besides main, have you seen or used any static method? Yes?
No, sir.
Think and answer. What is the first line of code that you wrote?
Right lines.
Property.
Yeah. Console.writeLine. What is console?
Class name.
Class. What is writeLine? It's a method. So if you're saying class name dot method name, you don't need to create an object of that class. You're directly calling it class name dot method name. Can I be sure that the writeLine method is a static method? Yes.
Yes.
Sir?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Right. So the first line of code that you wrote, you use the static method. You didn't write one yourself, but you use the static method. To call writeLine, you didn't need to create an object. You didn't need to create an object of the console class to call writeLine. You could call it directly. So any such methods that can be, directly called without having to create an object should be kept as static. It is not dependent on an object. It is a general purpose method. WriteLine, readLine, all those methods are static methods that you saw. Class name dot method. Are we clear on this? All right. Now let's try something else out here. In a non-static method, in a non-static method, I try to access this non-static data. So should this work?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes. I could access it directly. So the first one worked. Console.WriteLine I. What do you think? Would the second one also work? Console.WriteLine static I. Do you think this would work?
Yes.
No, sir.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
It will
It
work.
should be work, sir.
Right? So
Yes,
from a non-static method, can we access static data directly? That is the question that I'm asking.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir. We can.
No, sir.
No, sir. Static
No, sir.
method only allows static variables.
But this is not a static method. No? See
Yes,
which
sir.
method I'm writing it in. I'm writing it in the non-static method. I'm asking you from a non-static method, can I access a static member directly?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Yes, sir. We can.
Yes, sir.
Yes. My bad.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So answer is yes. Now, why is it not causing a problem? Or what is the issue out here? Firstly, how do I call display? To call display, what am I doing? How am I
Create an
calling
object.
display?
Creating object.
Object.display. So when you call object.display, and if you're trying to access I, it is understood that this is the current object's I. This is actually this dot I. So when you say display, and then you're calling display as object.display, when you talk about I, this is understood to be object.I. What are the current objects I? So there's no ambiguity here. All right, there's no problem here. Now, when you write static I, how many copies of static I are there?
Single.
Only one, sir.
Only one copy.
Yes.
So wherever you access it from, if I say static I, there is no ambiguity there also. Right? Because there's only one single copy of I, one copy of static I. How many copies of I were there? This non-static variable, how many copies were there?
Whatever number of objects.
Multiple, depending upon number of objects. But static I had only one copy. So wherever you access it from, there is no problem whatsoever. There's no ambiguity whatsoever. So from a non-static method, I can access static members directly without any problem. Right? And this is understood to be class name dot static variable. So this works perfectly okay. But what happens when I try to move the same code to a static function, to a static member? First thing is, let's talk about line 41. Static I. Would this cause a problem?
No.
No, sir.
No, sir.
Remember, we said that there's no ambiguity. There's only one single copy of this. So there's no problem with this whatsoever. From wherever you want, you can access this static variable directly. But what about this one now? When you say I, here, how are you accessing it? You are accessing it from the static function. How did you call the static function?
By creating object.
Huh?
With the
Without an
class.
object.
Direct
Class name.
With class name.
With class name.
Class name. So you access it as class name dot method name. So here you didn't specify which object you're accessing it for. Here it's directly class name. Now, how many copies of I are there? There is O1.I is also there, O2.I is also there. There are multiple copies of I. So in here, when you go to static display, if I said I, it does not understand which I you want to access. Because I is not at the class level, I is at the object level. And depending upon number of objects, there will be multiple copies of I. So if I just try doing console.WriteLine I, would this work?
No.
No, sir.
No, sir.
Because there is ambiguity.
No, sir.
It says that I don't know which object you're trying to access to. Saying an object reference is required for this. I don't know which object you want to access. You want to access O1.I, O2.I, O3.I, which one you want to access? I don't know. So you cannot give this directly. Are we clear on this, everyone? So the thumb rule is, of course, what? That from a static function, you can only access other static members directly. You cannot access non-static data directly. But from a non-static function, you can access both. You can access what? You can access non-static data as well as static data from there, from a non-static function. All right. So these are things that you already knew, or just a quick revision of some of these concepts. Right. All right. I'm not done with static members, where I'm in fact halfway through the code, but I won't finish even in 5 minutes or so. I'll take a little longer than 5 minutes. So if it was just 5 minutes, I would have continued the session, but it's going to take longer. So we'll take a break at this point. It's just 12 o'clock sharp right now. We'll resume the session at 12:30. Right. So see you after a short break.
Yes, sir.
Okay, sir.
All right, so I'm back. Can you all hear me and see me? Audio, video, okay?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let's continue with where we had last stopped off. We were looking at static members, and they tried creating a static variable, and we had created a static function. Okay. So quick recap. Why create a static variable? Yes.
To share it with all objects.
Right. So you want to have a single copy of your data.
Single copy.
Right. In the earlier session, we created a property, right? So why would you want to create a property? Why would you want to create a property?
Validation.
Validation.
Right. So my next question to you is, why would you want to have a static property? Why would you want to have a static property?
If there is no relation with object.
Answer is very simple.
For validating single copy variables.
Correct. So if you want to have a single copy of your data with validations, that's why you would create a static property. Right. I'll take you back to your console class. You have worked with the console class. When you say console dot, right line, beep, clear that you see out here, those are methods. But for example, things like error or background color, right, or caps lock, what are these?
Properties.
Those are properties. So for example, if I wanted to set the background color, so I could say console.background color equal to, and then console color dot whatever, right, for example. So what am I using out here? This is an example of a static property. How do I know it's static?
We're accessing it by class name.
Class name dot property is being accessed directly with the class name. So any properties that you're creating, you want to have a single copy of your data and you want to have validations on that, you could create it as a static property. So let's try creating a static property. Just to save time, I'll copy paste some of my previous code. Okay. How do I make this static? Yes.
Static keyword.
Use the static keyword. Now, when I make this static, why is this giving an error?
P2 is not static.
Non-static.
So
To make getters and setters static.
Why?
Sorry, private. Not static side.
Variables are not static. That's
so what is the error? Why is it giving an error?
We are accessing instance without object.
Correct. So remember, from a static function, you can only access static members directly. If it's not a static member, then you need to create an object of that class. So what is the solution to that? What will I also need to do? Make P2 also as static. The variable P2 also needs to be made as static. Are we clear on this? So this is how I could actually create a static property. To access this static property, I've not put validations. Can I put validations here if I want to? If value less than so and so, then do something or whatever. I could put in validations there. I've not done that, but you could do that. To access that, you would access it as class name dot and then the static property equal to whatever value. That's how you could go ahead and create a static property. Are we clear on this?
Yes, sir.
yes, sir.
Okay. In the earlier example, we saw how you could create a constructor. So why create a constructor? Yes.
To initialize.
To initialize the object.
Right. So whatever data members that you have, you can initialize them with their properties or fields or whatever. So my next question would be, why create a static constructor? Why would you want to create a static constructor?
For initializing static members.
Correct. Right. So to initialize static members. The static constructor, let me ask you this instead of giving you the information, let me ask you, when is the static constructor called?
When the class is
When a class is created.
Correct. When the class is loaded into memory. The answer is when the class is loaded into memory. Right. So next question, of course, is when is the class loaded into memory?
When we compile the code.
No, wrong answer.
When we call any static variable.
When we call any
Static field or static method.
okay,
Inside main.
partly correct.
When we create an object first time.
Correct. So these are the two halves. Both people have given me half answer each. So a class is loaded into memory either when the first object is created. First object of that class, of course, is created, or when a static member is accessed for the first time. Okay. So both these options would be causing the class to be loaded. Okay, either of the two, whichever happens first. Both, it will not call it twice, it will happen only once. So if you look at my lines of code out here in the main, let me purposely just break this down into 2 lines. Right? On which line of code is my class getting loaded into memory?
14.
11.
11.
11. I'm talking about this class, class 1. When is class 1 getting loaded into memory? I'm not talking about program class. I'm talking about class 1. When is class 1 getting loaded into memory?
On line number 14.
And number 13. sir.
Correct. So line number 14. Why line number 14? That's where the first object of that class is getting created.
Yes, sir.
All right. What if I did something like this? Again, the same question. When is the class getting loaded into memory?
Line number 13.
13.
13.
Line number 13. Why 13 this time?
Static member is accessed there.
Correct. You are accessing a static member for the first time. So whatever happens first. If an object was created first, then that, or if the static member was accessed first, then that. One of the two. Either one of the two. That's when the class would be loaded into memory. So where is the static constructor getting called? On which line is it getting called? Yes. One.
Line number 13.
Line number 13. That's where the class is getting loaded into memory. Are we explicitly calling the static constructor? Are we writing any code which says call the static constructor?
No.
No, sir.
No. We're just using our class, and then if that happens to be the first time that the class is loaded, that's when the static constructor is getting called. So the static constructor is implicitly called. You're not making an explicit call to it. Right? It is implicitly called. Now, if you're implicitly calling it, then can you pass any values to it? Can you pass any parameters to it? If you're going to be implicitly calling it, not explicitly calling it, can you pass any parameters to it?
No, sir.
So passing parameters is out. So
Yes,
therefore, the static constructor does not have any parameters. And if it cannot have any parameters, you cannot dash it. If a static constructor cannot have any parameters, you cannot dash it. Fill in the blanks.
Override.
Overload.
Overload. Right? You can't overload it. To overload it, what do you need to do? You need to have different parameters. But here it doesn't have any parameters at all. So you can't overload it. So these are some of the key features of the static constructor. The static constructor is called when either when the first object is created or when the static member is accessed for the first time. It is implicitly called. It cannot have parameters, and therefore, of course, it cannot be overloaded. So let's try creating a static constructor. And why do we create a static constructor? We're going to use it to initialize all your static members. So let's create a static constructor. All right. Now, one more thing, the static constructor is implicitly private. Static constructor is implicitly private, meaning what? You cannot explicitly go and give it any access specifier. It's understood to be private. So for example, here, if I try doing this, this won't work. Right? You can't give it an access specifier. You can't even give it a private access specifier. Why can't you give in that? Because when you're giving him an access specifier, you are explicitly giving it. So I'm saying the static constructor is implicitly private. And what would you do in here? Yes. What will you do in here? Initialize all your static members. So for example, let's say static I equal to some value, let's say 1000. Okay. So instead of doing this, what if I did, for example, console.writeLine class 1 dot static I? What if I did this? I have not initialized it here. Let's say this is 2000. I have not initialized it, but by default, what's going to happen when you try to read the value? It's going to first call the static constructor where the value will be initialized. And then when you try printing it, it would actually print it as 1000. Let's try running this. Right. So static constructor called, that's the first thing that happened. And then the value came out as 1000. Are we clear on this?
Yes, sir.
All right. Can we also have a non-static constructor in here? In addition to a static constructor, can we also have a non-static constructor? A regular constructor that we've been having all along? Yes?
Yes.
No?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes? All right. So if I write this line of code first, on this line, line number 14, which constructor will it call? Will it call the static constructor or the non-static constructor or both? If both, then what is the order? Which one will it call on line 14?
On a static.
First static, then non-static.
Correct. So both will be called. Why is the static being called? Because it's the first time that you are creating an object. And non-static because every object that you're creating is going to call the non-static constructor in any case. And between the two, the static constructor gets called first, followed by whatever that line is doing. In this case, it's calling the non-static constructor. So try putting in this, try playing around with this. What if you had both sort of constructors? Okay. So this, a lot of this you need to sort of play around with the code. So same things that we said, I'm just putting them down as comments. Static constructor is implicitly called. It cannot have parameters. It cannot be overloaded. It does not have any access specifier, or it is also called as implicitly private. Right. All right. Now, one more thing that you can create, which is static, is a static class. Right. Now, if you create a static class, then the static class can have only static members in there. So if you create a class, let's say public static class name, that class can only have static members, right? There are a couple of more restrictions to that. Now think about it. If you have a class that has only static members, would you need to create an object of that class?
No, no, sir. No, sir.
No, sir.
Right? Because if you create an object, what would you get? Obj dot. What will you get out there? If all members are static, what will you get with object dot? What will you get?
Nothing.
Nothing. No members will be available there. So if you create a static class, there is one more restriction that it adds, is that you cannot create an object of the static class. A static class cannot be instantiated. And also, we have not seen inheritance so far, but a static class cannot be used as a base class. You cannot inherit from a static class. You can't use it as a base class for other classes. All right. So what is the use of a static class? What are we using it for? For creating general purpose functions. Static members would be in there, and you will be just directly calling it. So such classes you don't need to instantiate, and you don't need to inherit from this. The console class that you've been working with so far is an example of a static class. So by the way, if you want to get help on any class, let's say if you want to get help on console, if you move your mouse pointer on this, it shows you class system.console. So if you click on this, for example, it takes you into, the signature for that class. It doesn't show you the code. It's just showing you the signature. It just gives you the, what does that method do and details about that method. So the console class, for example, is an example of a static class. So you would not be able to create an object of this. You won't be able to use it for any, as a base class, and everything in there will be static. Are we clear on this? So for you to do, you have to create a static class. Okay. What are some of the things that you should try out when you create a static class? You would not be allowed to put in non-static members, and you will not be able to instantiate this, nor will you be able to use it as a base class. So these are the things that you need to try. Okay. Syntax for creating a static class. Yes. Give me the syntax.
Public static keyword, class name, braces open close.
Yeah. You forgot the word class. So public static class
name.
Right? That would allow you to create a static class. All right, so we're moving away from static members. Right, we're going to move away into a different topic altogether. And the next topic that we're going to look at is inheritance in .NET.
Sir, like Java, constructor chaining as in .NET?
Yeah, you can do that as well.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Let's discuss some concepts of inheritance. Firstly, I like to ask this question every time I start up a new concept: why have inheritance? Why have inheritance?
Reusability.
Code reusability.
Code reusability. Right. So if you have some existing class, and if you have some code in that class, and you'd like to have something similar with some additional features, instead of rewriting the whole thing, you can inherit from an existing class and add on more features to that, right? So this is one of the key features of object-oriented code, inheritance. And you would have seen this before in other object-oriented languages that you have studied as well. Just a few terms that you use out here. The class that you're inheriting from is referred to either as the base class, or as the parent class, or as the superclass. The class that is inheriting, is getting the details, it's called as the derived class, or as the child class, or as a subclass. So all of these terms meaning exactly the same. The derived class, I'll be using the terms base and derived, but the other terms are substitutable. So the derived class gets everything that is there in the base class, and then it can add its own features, right? While creating inheritance in something like C++, you would have seen relations like this, wherein you had a base class, right? And then you had a class, derived class, right? And the derived class inherits from the base class. What is this an example of? Where one class inherits from the other. What is
Single
referred to as single inheritance? Okay. You could also have a situation where instead of inheriting from one class, a class inherits from more than one class. So base class 1 and base class 2, right? And the derived class, instead of inheriting from just one base class, inherits from base class 1 and base class 2. You would have seen this in C++. And what is this an example of? Multiple inheritance, wherein you have more than one base class. Now, multiple inheritance is not allowed in .NET. You cannot inherit from more than one class, and something similar to Java. In Java also you would have seen that multiple inheritance is not allowed, right?
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, why it is not allowed? What is the actual reason behind it?
Okay. I'll give you a short answer right now, and I'll give you a longer answer a little later after we have seen a few classes.
Okay, sir.
So the short answer right now is that it causes problems in your code. It causes ambiguities in your code. Now, what sort of ambiguities, why it causes, when it causes, I want to have a little longer discussion on that, but a little later, not right now. Okay. So,
okay, sir.
So hold on. If we have time today, then we'll come to that topic today itself. If not today, then tomorrow definitely. So C++, for example, allowed multiple inheritance. But most modern day programming languages don't allow that. And the reason is because of the complexities involved in multiple inheritance. That's my short answer to you right now. But I will delve deeper into this answer a little later in my training. Okay.
Okay, sir. No. Thank you.
Now, a variation of single inheritance, because this is also single inheritance at play, is multi-level inheritance. So you could have a situation like this. When you have a base class, a derived class inherits from the base class, and a sub-derived class inherits from the derived class. Now, supposing in this situation, if the base class had members A and B, the derived class had members C and D. Firstly, what will be the members that will be available in the derived class?
A, B, C, D.
A, B, C, D.
B, C, and D. So if you look at the derived class, now the derived class has A, B, C, and D. When a sub-derived class inherits from the derived class, it will get all four of these members, A, B, C, and D. And let's assume it adds E and F out here. The sub-derived class now would have A, B, C, D, E, and F. And this is an example of multi-level inheritance, where a derived class can act as a base class for a further sub-derived class. And you can go down the hierarchy. I mean, there's no limit of number of levels that you can go down to. But each multi-level inheritance is actually what, if you look at this, is what, if you look at any of these, this is what actually, this is nothing else but single inheritance only. So multi-level inheritance is just a variation of single inheritance. And you can, take it down further. So this, of course, is allowed here in .NET or in Java for that matter. But what is not allowed, what you have to remember here is you cannot inherit from more than one base class. You can only inherit from a single base class, and that's what single inheritance. This is one of the CLS rules. We mentioned CLS specifications the other day, right? So one of the CLS specifications is that only single inheritance will be allowed. Now, I'll give you an example in .NET. Let me talk about CLS. I may have mentioned this. I don't know. I don't remember whether I mentioned this yesterday or not. A language like VC++, right? So you can have VC++ for .NET also, and that VC++ for .NET is called as managed C++. What does the term managed mean? The term managed, what does that mean?
Managed by CLR.
Code that is run by the CLR. So managed C++ is the .NET equivalent of VC++. Right? Now in managed, in VC++, it allowed you to have multiple inheritance. Because VC++ is based on C++, and C++ allowed multiple inheritance. But when you come to managed C++, you cannot use multiple inheritance. So VC++ allows multiple inheritance, but managed C++ does not. When you write code, you can write code which says that one class inherits from more than two, but you have to mark that block as a no GC block. No GC meaning that it will not be run by the CLR. Right? It will not be run by the CLR. And all you can write code in there, but that code will not be managed code. That code will be unmanaged. So in .NET, the only type of inheritance that is allowed is single inheritance. Are we clear on this? All right. Let's try a small example of this.
So not even multi-level?
Multi-level we said is yes.
Yes.
Multi-level.
I got confused.
Multi-level is a variation of single only.
Yeah, correct. I got confused.
Right. Multi-level, each multi-level, if you look at each class, each one of them is doing single inheritance. All right. Before we begin writing any code, let me ask you a question. In .NET, have you created any class that inherits from some other class? Have you created any class that inherits from some other class?
Not yet.
No, sir. Not it.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
The
Object
Yes.
class.
object,
Yes.
sorry.
Object class.
Every class that you create in .NET by default inherits from the object class. We said that yesterday. So even without explicitly trying out inheritance, you are already using inheritance. Every class, the first class that you wrote, any class that you wrote, is by default inheriting from where? From object. So when you write one method, you don't just get your method, you get all the methods from the object class also. Right? So not that you have not tried, you already are, have tasted inheritance in a slightly different context, wherein we are saying that by default every class inherits from object. Let's try this now. Let's try creating our own class, public class. I'll call this base class. All right. And let's keep it simple right now, just to test out the concept. Public int a, for example. Let's call this x, and ing, I'll call this. And I have a derived class which inherits from base class. Right? And let's say this adds a member J. So have we tried multi-level inheritance in this example? Is this
Yes, sir.
multi-level inheritance?
Yes, sir.
Yes, already. Why?
Yes, sir.
Because
Yes.
base is inheriting from whom right now? By
Object.
default,
Object.
is inheriting from object. And you're inheriting from base. So you already tried out multi-level inheritance in this example. All right. Think and answer. What will be the members in base class? What will be the members in base class? One is, of course, obvious, which is I. And besides I,
All members of object class.
all members of the object class. Now, I'm not going to keep saying that all the time, but it is understood that all members of object class will automatically come in here. So what will derived class contain now? It will contain I plus J plus the members of the object class which are coming in through your base class. So let's quickly confirm that. Create an object of the derived class. And if you did O dot, you get I, J, and the object class members. All of them are available. So this is how you could actually use inheritance. So similar syntax to what you've been using all along. Are we clear on this side? All right. Now, typically, when you start talking about inheritance, you now talk about the access specifiers that are there in .NET. Okay. So what are the ones that you are aware of already? Maybe from a C perspective. What are the ones that you know of already?
Private. Package
public,
level, private, public.
protected.
So you do know of private, you do know of public, and you also use protected in C++. So give me the definition of the private. Where is it available?
Inside the same class.
Same class.
It's only available inside the same class. Public?
Everywhere.
Everywhere.
That's a nice way of putting it. Everywhere. So anywhere you can access it from. Protected?
Only in derived class.
So firstly, same class, of course. It's understood, I know, but let me say that. So it's available in the same class and only in the derived class. Right? So these are three things that you're familiar with out here. I'm going to introduce other access specifiers that you don't know about, you have not seen before. In .NET, in C#, you have something called as internal, which says it's available firstly in the same class. Same class is a given. And also available in the same assembly. So it's available to other classes which are in the same assembly. Okay. Now, what do I mean by same assembly? If you look at this, how many classes do you see here? How many classes do you see here?
Three.
Three classes. So this here is one project. Agree? Inheritance is one project. When you compile one project, you will get one assembly. And all the classes that are there in the same project will go into that assembly. So from your understanding point of view, when I say same assembly, what does this also mean? Another word for assembly?
Same package.
Same
package.
Sorry?
Same package.
Project. Forget Java for now.
Same project.
Forget Java for now. I've been saying that one project compiles into one assembly. So if you're looking in Visual Studio, see in .NET, there's no concept of a project. In Visual Studio .NET, which is your IDE, there is a concept of a project. So when you go to Visual Studio, you create a project and you add some files in there, and the files contain classes. All the classes in one project will be compiled into one assembly. So one project on compilation will give you one assembly. So when I'm giving you the definition of internal, I'm giving you the .NET definition. .NET definition says what? It's available in the same class and same assembly. But from your understanding, what should you also understand this as? Same assembly means what? Same assembly means what?
Same project.
Same
Visual Studio, same project. Are we clear on this?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
That is internal. So if I define something in the base class as internal, where will it be available to? Which classes will it be available to? No, internal I'm asking you. Will be available to what?
The classes of same project.
Program class and derived class project. Yeah, okay, you are naming it. Sorry. You were saying derived class, but I thought you were saying the derived class. Okay. So you are getting it in here. Would you get it in the other projects?
No, sir.
No, it will not be. Internal will not be available in the other projects. So that's what you mean by internal. The next access specifier is protected internal. Now, protected internal is a combination of protected and internal. What does protected say? Available where?
Same class and derived class.
Same class and derived class. What does internal say?
Same class and same assembly.
Same class and same assembly. Now, if you notice same class is coming twice. So I'll remove this. Where is protected internal available? Protected internal is available what?
Derived
Either in the
classes
same
in
class
assembly.
or to all derived classes wherever they might be, or to other classes in the same assembly. So this is where protected internal is available. Remember, if protected is available, protected internal will definitely be available. If internal is available, then also what? Protected internal will definitely be available. Because protected internal is a combination of both of these. Are we clear on this?
Sir, what about your last statement? I didn't get it clearly.
I'm saying that protected internal is a combination of the previous two. So if protected is available, then protected internal will definitely be available. Why? Why?
Because it can access in same class and derived class.
Correct. So if protected is available, protected internal will definitely be available. Similarly, if internal is available, then protected internal will also be available.
Yes.
Okay. The sixth access specifier that you have is private protected. So private protected is available firstly to the same class and only to derived classes which are in the same assembly. So what is the difference between protected and private protected? The derived class now needs to be in the same assembly, and only then it will have access. If you have a derived class in another assembly, then private protected will not be available. Protected would be available there if it's a derived class in a different assembly, but not private protected. So these are the 6 different access specifiers in .NET. Questions, if any?
So in protected internal, that derived class could be in different assembly also. No?
If it's a yes, so you have answered your question yourself.
Okay, sir.
The moment you say protected internal, the protected implies derived classes also are available, wherever they might be.
Okay, sir.
Sir, protected internal and private protected, you have written both are same as well.
No, they're not the same. This
Because
is
you have written that same class.
This is an or. Either this or this or this. This is this or this and this. So there's a big difference. Grammar changes everything. No? The words might look similar, but grammar and syntax changes everything. Yes.
So protected internal can be accessed in derived class of another assembly also.
Yes.
Yes, that cannot be happened in private protected.
Correct.
That's the difference, I guess, main.
Yes. All right. So let's test this out. Let's try creating this. While doing this, we will also see how we can access code from a different assembly. All right. So we'll try this example. The idea behind this is twofold. First is we'll check the access specifier. Secondly, we'll also see how, what if there's some code in a different assembly, how you can call it in your assembly.
Sir?
Yes.
So one project has just one assembly, or it can have multiple assemblies?
One project will compile to one assembly.
So in protected internal, it should be same or different project. I mean multiple, like I think same and different project.
Okay, let me take the example.
Okay, sir, please.
Right, and that will clarify things, because right now it's all theorizing.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So let us create a practical, scenario, and then I will ask you all to help me with the answers. Okay. I'm going to copy paste some code from my previous, examples that I've worked with earlier batches, just so that I can speed up things a little bit here. So I have, by the way, can you see my screen? Can you see what I'm doing?
Yes, sir.
I'm making some changes. Can you see what's happening there?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Good. I don't want you all to see what I'm doing. Okay. So I'm making some changes in here, and I'm okay. Yeah, almost done. Give me a minute. In fact, you can see what I'm doing now. All right. Let me take you through what all I have created. Now you can see my screen, right? I've unpaused that, so you could see what I'm doing.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So I have created a base class in which I have these 6 different access specifiers. Now I have named them accordingly. So my public variable I have named public, private variable I have named it private, and so on and so forth. Okay, so I've given them the same name as the access specifier. So before we go into the derived class, these are the same things that I wrote in Notepad some time back. Okay, same things that I wrote in Notepad sometimes. My question to you is going to be, what is available and what is not. So I expect you all to give me a yes or a no answer. Okay, I'd like you all to make as much noise as you all want to. Okay, everybody please answer. So it's okay if I get a, there should be so much noise. I should tell you all now, please shut up. You all are creating too much of noise. I'm getting only 4 or 5 people answering. And I would like everybody to participate. Does not matter if there is confusion. Let there be confusion. Let's see one day what happens if there is confusion. So here is what I'm doing. I've got a base class. These are the things that I have created here. Let me try and get everything on one screen. Right. So this is my base class. Now, this is the hierarchy of classes. I've got a base class and I've got a derived class which inherits from the base class. Okay, so my derived class inherits from the base class. Right now, I'm not using that derived class. I'm just creating a regular class and I'm trying to create an object of that class. My question to you is what all would be available. So one by one, I'll ask you, I'll require you all to give me the answers. If I create an object of this class in class program and I say O dot, my question is, would public be available?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Sir.
So blindly, you don't even have to think about it.
Yes, sir.
You don't even have to think about it. Would public be available? If I start saying the word, would public
Available.
By the time I start my word per, your answer should already be yes. Okay. So is public available?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Would private be available?
No.
No, sir.
No.
Right?
No.
So from another class, blindly no. You don't have to worry about that. So these are things that you spent your childhood on. So you should know these by heart. All right. Would protected be available?
No.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
No.
I
Yes.
heard 3
Yes.
yeses.
No, sir. No, sir.
Yes.
No, sir. No, sir. No,
Sir.
no, sir.
No.
No, sir.
No.
All right. So let me
Not at
ask
all.
you, this class program, is it the same class as the base class?
No, sir.
Is
No, sir.
class
Yes,
program
sir.
the
Yes,
same
sir.
class as the base class?
Yes, sir.
No.
It is
No.
available, sir.
Is it a derived class?
No.
Is class program a derived class?
No, sir.
No, sir.
No, sir.
So those who are saying yes, why are you saying yes? Those who are saying yes, why are you saying yes? Are you like tossing a coin or something and then if it lands heads, yes, lands tails, no? No, there is some logic that you have to use, no? If the definition says it's available in the same class and derived class, is class program a derived class?
No.
No, sir.
The same class? Definitely not. So why are you saying yes? Those who are saying yes to protect it. Yeah. Is it a no?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, meaning yes. Yes, it is a no. Okay. Right? Okay. So protected is not available. Agree?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Would internal be available?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Sir.
Sir.
Available, sir.
Yes, sir.
Available.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes,
Because
sir.
it's in the same
Same assembly.
Same link.
Same assembly.
same assembly, same project, whatever.
Yes.
Would protected internal be available?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Yes, sir.
Available.
Yes. Who's saying yes? Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes, sir.
Protected is not available, no?
Sir.
But
Protected
internal.
internal
Internal
is available.
is available.
Internal available.
Internal is available. So there are 2 doors to a room. There's one door which is the protected door, one door which is the internal door. If either of the doors is open, you can get it with protected internal. So because internal is available, protected internal will also be available. All right. Would private protected be available?
No. No, sir.
No.
No, sir. No, sir.
Derived class. Is this a derived class?
No, sir.
So would it be available?
No.
No,
sir.
No, sir. No, sir.
So the yes that we got was for public, internal, and protected internal. Let's confirm this. Let's confirm this. Public, internal, and protected internal were available. The others are not accessible. Right? That was the first thing that we tried. Similar thing I'm going to do with the derived class. In the derived class, I inherit from the base class, and I'm now trying to access this dot. So this is giving you a reference to the current object. This dot, what all would be available in the derived class? One by one again. Quick answers. A lot of you are still not answering. I would like you all to contribute. Public.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Blindly yes. Private.
No, sir.
No, sir.
Only no. Protected.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Sir.
Why?
Derived class.
Derived class.
Internal.
Yes, sir.
Sir.
Why?
Same assembly.
Same assembly. Protected internal.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Why?
Internal.
Derived class, same assembly.
Class.
Same assembly.
Either of the options.
Class and same
Both the
assembly.
options are true. So through either of them, through either the protected part or through the internal part, through both parts is true. Private protected.
Yes, sir.
Because of protected.
Derived class which is in the same assembly. So this would be available out here. So the only no that you got was for private.
Private.
Let's confirm this dot, and the only thing that is not available here is private. Other than private, everything else is available. All right.
Yes, sir.
Now, so far we have been looking at classes in the same assembly. So what I'm going to do next is move a class to another different assembly and then try to access it. And then you will see that the internals, not being available. Right? Any questions before I do that? Is there anything that you want to ask me before I go into that part? All right. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to add one more project, right? And I'm going to put a class in the other project and try to access that class from here. So let me add that other project. Solution and add a new project. Now the other project that I'm adding, I don't want to run the project. I don't want that project to run. I don't want it to run on its own. I want it to only have classes. So I want to compile it to a DLL and not a EXE. A DLL will have what? Only classes in there. It will not run by itself. Now, whenever you go in for a console app, it's going to create an EXE. A console app requires that you need to have at least one main in there. The main function needs to be there. So I'm going to change my project type. Instead of a console app, instead of a console type of project, I'm going to go in for a library. And in the library, there's an option here for class library. So when you create a class library, on compilation, the class library gives you a DLL. And it need not have a main function. It need not have an entry point defined. So that's how you create a DLL in .NET, by going in for a class library. Now you will find that there are two class libraries here. One which says class library into bracket .NET framework and one which does not. So as before, the one for into bracket .NET framework is for Windows only, is .NET framework. And the other one is for
Every platform.
.NET Core.
.NET Core applications. So make sure you're picking up the one for .NET framework. So we're picking up a class library for .NET framework. It tells you also project for creating a C# class library into bracket .dll. So it's prompting you there itself, what it's going to create. The name, I'll just call this as, let's say, test access specifiers. Right? And when you create this type of projects, do you see anything different out here? What are the differences in the code out here?
Main method.
Main method has not been created for you. So it doesn't have an entry point effect. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is that same class that I had earlier, that base class that I had here, I will copy it to test access specifiers. Now my base class is there in the other assembly, and I will try to access this base class from my inheritance project. Now, before you do anything else, you need to build your solution and see whether the code that you're written is giving you any errors or not. If it's giving you any errors, that means then you can't do the next step. So make sure that there are no errors. So build 4 succeeded, 4 projects are there, no errors in here. Okay, because if there are compilation errors in your code, you will not be able to do the next step. All right, so this is ready. This is tested. I can't run this. Let's come back to inheritance. So now my question to you is based on, we have not done it before, but we have talked about it. How do I include another project in here? How do I include that other assembly in here? What do I need to do in this project? If I have to use the other assembly, what do I need to do?
Reference.
Very good. You have to add a reference. So in the inheritance project, let's go and add a reference to test access specifiers. So I'm going to inheritance, right click on references and add a reference. When you add a reference, these references that you see out here are all the .NET libraries. These are all the .NET base classes. So you won't find it here. Instead, look out for it in projects. So on the left-hand side, go to projects. And what does it show you here now? What is it showing you in projects? What is it showing you here? What are these
Project we
projects?
created.
Project which we have created.
Correct. All the projects that are currently open in your solution, these projects are shown out here. Now, what if your project is not open in your solution? What if it is not open? Then you need to go into browse. Then you go to browse and you select the DLL file that you want to add a reference to. So it will be there in the bin debug folder of that other project. But if it's there open in the solution, then you can pick it up from here itself. So the one that I want to pick up here is test access specifiers. I want to add a reference to test access specifiers and click on OK. Now, when you add a reference, you'll notice that it has added this assembly here. Test access specifiers assembly has been added out here. Okay, that's what's been done here. Now we can use it in our code. Okay, so let's come back and use it in our code. Have you understood this step, everybody? Right? In case you have not understood or if you have missed out something, the time is around 1:30. So you can go back into the recording and check out around 1:30 what we did. What did we do out here? I'll repeat one more time. Right click on references, add a reference, go to the projects and add a reference to the project that you want to add out here. Okay. All right. Now let's come back to this code. Instead of inheriting from base class, I want to inherit from test access specifiers.base class. So this is this test access specifiers.base class, which was in the other assembly. So let's do this. Test access specifiers dot base class. I'm inheriting from there. I'm using a class which is in a different assembly. My questions are still the same. This dot this dot. Now you inherited from that class, this dot. Would public be available?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Kindly yes. Kindly yes. Would private be available?
No.
No, sir.
Kindly no. It's in a different class, so it's not available. Would protected be available?
No, sir.
Yes, sir.
No.
Yes, sir. It will be available.
Yes, right.
No. Why are you saying no? We are inheriting from that class, right? We are inheriting from the class. So this is a derived class. So is it available to the derived class?
Yes.
Yes.
sir.
Yes. The person who said no, have you understood?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So protected would also be available. Would internal be available?
No.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So it will be available.
Yes,
Good
sir.
answer. Very good answer. Why will it be available?
Derived class.
Internal. Does internal say derived class?
Yes, sir.
Look at the definition. I'm highlighting it.
Same class, same assembly.
Assembly.
Does internal have any definition of derived class anywhere?
No, sir.
No, sir.
So let me ask the question again. For internal, is that class is it in the same class? No.
No,
Is it in the same
No.
assembly?
No.
It's a different project now. So would internal be available here?
No.
No, sir.
There is no. Would protected internal be available?
Yes.
sir.
Yes,
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Why?
Derived
Because
class.
protected is available.
Is available.
Therefore, protected internal will also be available. Right? So protected internal will also be available. Would private protected be available?
No.
Yes.
No, sir.
No, sir.
No, sir.
No, sir.
No, sir.
No.
No, sir.
No, sir.
No, sir.
Right? So private protected is not available because they are no longer in the same
Same
Same assembly.
Are we clear? It is a derived class, but they are in different assemblies, so not available. So what did we say yes to? We said yes to public.
Public.
We said yes to protected
Protected.
and to protected internal.
Internal.
Right? Let's confirm that. So this dot public and the two protected, the two protected and protected internal. It's available there. All right. Clear on this?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay. Let's go back here. And instead of creating an object of the base class, now I will create an object of test access specifiers dot base class. Okay, I'll create an object of that other class. Again, the same questions. O2 dot, what is available? Public?
Public.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Blindly yes. Private?
No.
No, sir.
Private? No.
No.
Protected?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
No, sir.
Protected?
No, sir. No,
No,
sir.
sir. No.
No.
No, sir.
Is it a derived class?
No.
Is this a derived class? Is this class a derived class?
No, sir.
No, sir.
No. So would protected be available?
No, sir.
No, sir.
No, sir.
All right. Would internal be available?
No, sir.
No, sir.
No, sir.
No, sir.
Assembly, no?
Are they in the same assembly?
No.
No, sir.
So internal is no. Now protected was no, internal was no. Would protected internal be a yes?
No.
No,
sir.
Both are no. So protected internal also is no. What about private protected?
No.
No.
No, sir.
No.
No.
No, sir.
No. So what have we only said yes to?
Public.
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 So if you look at O2 dot, the only thing that is available to you here is a public. All right. So this is how these access specifiers work. Now, if you have a query, ask them, because now we have seen how they actually work. So if hopefully all your doubts and queries are answered. Okay. All right. Clear on this?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What if I did this? What is the default access specifier for a variable or for something defined inside a class? If I don't give an access specifier,
Private.
takes it as private. We have, I think, addressed this question before. So by default, this is private. Now, if you ask what is the default access specifier in .NET, there are two answers to this. So if you define something within a class, then those members by default are taken as private. So within a class, the default access specifier is private. But if you define something at the namespace level, what do you generally give at the namespace level? What do you give at the namespace level?
Global, like global variables.
Global variables.
Global.
No, you can't give global variables there. At the namespace level, we said the namespace can contain other namespaces or classes.
Class.
You can't create a variable there. A global variable has to be created inside a class. Agree or no? You
Yes,
can't
sir.
create a variable at the namespace level. So if you're creating something at the namespace level, what are you typically creating? You're creating your classes there. So at the namespace level, if you don't give an access specifier, it is taken as internal. Internal would imply what? Where is this class? Now this class program is being taken as what?
Internal.
So where is this class available?
Same
In
assembly.
same class and same assembly.
Only in the same assembly. Only in the same project. All right. So which is why I have been asking you all along to write public class name. Because generally when you create your classes, you want them to be available outside your assembly also. You want them to be reused. And if you don't give them as public, what is happening by default?
Internal.
It is taking it as internal. So if you try to access them from outside your project, suddenly you cannot access them. I'll give you an example. Let's say, for example, if you come back here, if you come to this other assembly, and if I remove the word public, so here it will not cause a problem. But where will it cause a problem? Where will it cause a problem? Look in the other assembly.
Derived class.
In the other assembly. In the other assembly, why is now base class suddenly not accessible? Why is it not available?
By default, it is internal.
Because it was internal there. So internal is not available in this assembly. So you'll have a problem out here. Like this. So which is why it is important that you mark your classes as public. Are we clear on this, everyone?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So these were the different access specifiers in .NET. Okay. Somebody in the morning asked me a question. You have a question related to access specifiers. So what did you want to ask?
So yes, yesterday I came across this internal word, so that's why I asked. We created two classes, and then in the next other class we had a method which we were not able to access in the different class.
Okay, fine. So is your doubt solved now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Let me go back to properties. And typically when you create a property, right? Let's call this P5. If you create a property in this manner, And if you wanted to make it a read-only property, how do you make it read-only? You've seen this before. How do you make it read-only?
Removing set.
Get.
You have
Not
only the
using
get
set.
and you remove the set. Right? That's one way of doing it.
Yes, sir.
Now, let me show you another way of doing the same thing. What you can use is you can use what is known as a property accessor. Okay. You can use what is known as a property accessor. So what is a property accessor? A property accessor is an access specifier that you give for either the get or the set. A property accessor is an access specifier that you give for one of the two, either the get or the set. You can't give it for both. Okay. So if you look at this code, can you make sense of what this code is doing? Can you tell me what this is doing? I'm saying public property, but set is private. Indicates what? Where can set be called from? Where can you call set from?
Same class only.
In the same class. From outside this class, it will not be called. So isn't that also making it read only?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
In the class, you can change it. But from outside the class, you will not be allowed to call the set. You will not be able to change. Now, there are certain rules for giving this. You can't just randomly give in this. There are certain rules. So what is the first rule that we have said? First rule, what we have said is what? Only one of get or set can have a property accessor. Right? You can't give it for both. You can't say get and set both. Like for example, I'm just giving you an example. Supposing I made this also as private. Supposing I made this also as private. Now, if both are private, then what is public? Are you getting what I'm trying to say? Doesn't make sense. Then the word public doesn't make sense if both of them are private. So you can't give it for both. You can give it for only one. Secondly, you can only reduce access, not increase it. Okay, you can only reduce access but not increase it. Meaning what? Let me start off with the access specifiers. You had 6 different access specifiers. Which one has the most access? Which has the highest access?
Public.
Public. Which has the least access?
Protected.
Which has the second highest?
Protected internal.
Protected internal. Because this is a combination of protected and internal. Right? Now, private protected is less than protected. Right? Agree?
Yes, sir.
Private protected is less than protected. And internal is not related to protected or private protected. So, sorry, internal is not related to private protected. So the access specifiers are in this manner. The order: public has the highest, followed by protected internal, followed by protected or internal, followed by private protected, and the least one is private. So when I'm saying you can reduce access, you can go in this order from top to down. So if it was public, you can make it any of the others. If it was protected internal, for example, if the property was protected internal, then the get or the set cannot be made public. They can be made anything below this. So this is what I mean by you can reduce access, you can't increase it. Public to private is okay. But private to public, that will not work. Are we clear on this, everybody?
Yes, sir. But where we use, sir, internal?
We just discuss internal. No?
Sir.
If you want it available in the same project only. I'm not understood your question. Are you asking me what does internal mean, or?
No, no, sir. In this last slide, you just mentioned internal just beside of this.
I'm saying they are at the same level.
Okay, same level. Okay, sir.
Because they are unrelated. No? So you can't have a hierarchy there.
Okay, sir.
Okay. All right. So yeah. So what is this? What are we saying here? Only for a property accessor, only one of getter set can have property accessor, and you can only reduce access. You cannot increase it. Are you clear on this? So this is another way of making, for example, a read-only property. I'm not trying it out. You try it out in the lab. All right. Questions, if any? Okay, so I have not finished inheritance. I have, taken up only couple of basic concepts of inheritance. One, of course, was creating a class that inherits from the other class, and one was, we saw access specifiers. But there's a lot more to deal with inheritance. We will, continue with inheritance in tomorrow's session. Okay, now here is where I will be giving you some work to work on, and I'll be giving you an assignment to work on. I will share the assignment in that common folder. Okay, so there'll be a folder called assignments where I'm sharing this. How do I want you to practice this? I do not want you to start with the assignment. You don't start with the assignment directly. I know you will be tempted to, but don't do that. You have to first finish trying all the examples that we've done for the day. So the priority is reinforcing these concepts that you have covered in class. You try them out in the lab. So you have to first try that out. Only after you have finished trying that out, then you have to start with the assignment. I am okay if you don't do the assignment. I'm okay if you don't do that. But I am not okay if you don't complete the exam. So your completing the examples are a priority. You getting very sure and absolutely clear about that. Also do a little bit of background reading. All the topics that we have covered in class today, you can use the ebook as a reference book and do background reading on that. There might be certain things that I like, if let's say in a given topic, I might cover the most important things. I might not cover all the possible things. So the book would give you more additional information about that. So first, finish the coding examples and then the assignment. Let me open the assignment and show you what I expect you all to do in the assignment.
Sir, can we apply all the access specifier to a class?
It depends on whether you have a class at the namespace level or at the class level. If you have it a class within a class,
yes,
then you can access, then you can like an inner class, a class written within a class, then you can have all the access specifiers on that. But a class defined at the namespace level can only be public or internal.
Okay, sir.
All right, so just I will be sharing these files. This is what I'm doing, but just take a minute to read through this out here. This is the first assignment that you have to do. Create a class employee with the following specifications. The first 4 given there are properties. So what properties am I asking to create? Name, which is of type string, and what's given ahead of that is the validation that I want. So what is the validation in this case? A blank name should not be allowed. Then employee number, which is of type int, must be greater than 0. Decimal basic between some range. So you decide the range. Whatever, let's say between 10,000 to 1 lakh. Let's say I'm just giving a random number, right? Short department number must be between or must be greater than 0. So these are the 4 properties that I wanted to create, right? One method called get net salary, which returns the calculated net salary. Now use any formula to get the net salary based on basic salary, which means what? Supposing you have basic. Now basic plus HRA plus DA, for example, minus PF minus tax could be one formula. That gives you the net salary. So use whatever formula that you want. I'm not asking you to create any specific formula. All right, create constructors to accept initial value for employee. So what are the possible ways in which you could pass it? A constructor which takes all 4 values. So, employee number, name, basic, and department number. These are the 4 values. A constructor which takes only 3 values. So you can either have 4 or 3 or 2 or 1 or 0 parameters in the constructor. What will be the best way of doing this?
Default
Default pattern. So instead of writing multiple constructors, instead of writing 5 different constructors, you can write it with 1 itself. So get it working with that. So this is the first assignment. Are we clear on this, everybody?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any doubts, questions about this assignment?
Sir, decimal is primitive data type.
Yes.
Okay.
So those, I have given you 4 different data types. I have not covered all data types, but you can use them. We'll go into an explanation of what it does a little later, but at least right now you can start off by using them. I have not done short with you also. I've done string and I've done int in my examples, but I'm asking to use short. Do you know what is short? Does anyone know what is short from C, C++? Do you know what is a short?
It is
Integrated.
It's actually a short int.
Yes.
So int is the 4-byte value, short is a 2-byte value.
2 byte.
Right? Decimal is used for, instead of float, double decimal. Decimal gives you the highest precision. So this is used for decimal points, where your values can have decimal points. Okay, are we clear on this, everybody?
Yes, sir.
Sir.
Now, when I was in the lab, what I found was this is the conversation going on. सर ने क्या बोला था रे करने को? अच्छा क्या करने का ये असाइनमेंट में? अच्छा कैसा करने का? अच्छा तू बता तेरा क्या कोड क्या है? This is the conversation going on, either in Hindi or in Marathi. काय करायचं काय त्याच्यात? Property म्हणजे काय? Yeah, in the majority of the labs that were there. So I have 2 problems with this. First, the language. So speak in English. So what is to be done? Properties. How do you create properties? What did sir say? Something he said, na? Some assignment you have to do, na? So what to do? Acha, employee. What is that employee? The class or what? So translation into English. So my first problem is that if you have a query, you have to ask me here. How do you know that your friend is telling you the right answer? How do you know that for sure? right? So if you have a doubt, you have to clarify that in class. I've told you on day one, I'm open to answering questions. I encourage questions and I would like you to ask your doubts. So if you're going to be sitting silently, you're going to lose out. So first thing is, please, whatever questions, doubts, queries that you have, get them clarified here itself. Right? You don't have to go into the lab and ask your friend what is to be done. Are we clear on this, everybody? Secondly, the language. Now, we're tired of telling you, please speak in English. And the reason for that is very simple, that when you go in for an interview, right now what you're doing is, you're talking in English, in Hindi or Marathi. So you're fluent in Hindi or Marathi. Now, when you go into the interview, you're not going to answer in Hindi or Marathi. Are they going to ask you, "Acha, bata, chal, aap bet. Bata, bhai, inheritance kya hota hai?" Are they going to tell you that? Or are they going to ask you something like, what is inheritance? So then when you're speaking there, you're going to have to do two things. You're going to say, "Acha, inheritance matlab na ek parent class hai, ek child class hai." And you're going to have to translate as you speak. And that's where you're going to fumble. And that's where you're not going to be fluent. And that's where, even if you know the answer, you're not going to be able to communicate to the other person that you know the answer. So we are not fools for telling you that speak in English. We don't have anything against Hindi, against Marathi. Marathi is my mother tongue. But why am I asking you not to speak in Marathi or not to speak in Hindi? Because it's going to help you in your interview. That's the objective. We are all working collectively towards that. And you yourself, the most important person in this collective effort, if you are going to defeat us, what is the big point? So we are tired of telling you this. And I'm saying we, I mean the entire, faculties, support faculties, non-technical people, everybody telling you the same thing and you just don't listen. Now it's the end of the module. When are you going to do that? And it should not be only, the conversation also goes like this. Acha, inheritance mein kya karne tha? Acha, sir has come. What is to be done in inheritance? That is how the conversation goes. So it's not I'm not a policeman. To hell with you all. You all speak in whatever language you all want to hear. It doesn't make a difference to me. But why are we insisting on that? We're trying to help you. If you're not going to help yourself, who's going to help yourself? Somebody said, no, I'm in the flow of Hindi. Get into the flow of English. That's what we've been telling you 6 months now. Get into the flow of English. And you will never get into the flow of English unless you speak in English. So I don't want people speaking in other languages. And if you're a friend of that other person, then instead of answering in that other language, please ask him, speak in English. Remind him, if he's in the flow, then you stop his flow. So this is a very serious matter. I'm taking it jokingly. I'm addressing it jokingly, but it's a very, very serious matter. You will know the answer and you will not be able to communicate it. You will flunk the interview because of that. Or the words that you speak will not be proper grammar, will not be proper English. So you all have been told speak technical stuff in English. I'm telling you speak everything in English. I'm telling you that. Because you all are not comfortable in English. And I can see that. If you are comfortable in English, then I had no problem with that. You all are not. When you ask me a question, you're grammatically wrong. When you answer a question, sometimes I can't make sense of the answer, but I know you know the answer. So don't let this situation come. Now, the last module that's going on, last couple, maybe I think you have software engineering after this. So please speak in English. All right? I'm not going to correct you. I'm not going to tell you why you're doing that. Nobody is going to police you. We are tired of doing that. So this is the first assignment. The second assignment is a slight variation of the first assignment. Read the problem statement. I will be sharing this with you in any case, but read the problem statement and tell me what you see different in the second assignment. It's 95% the same. There's only one small difference. Can you tell me what is the difference in this assignment?
Employee number must be auto generated.
Employee
Correct.
number must be generated.
Employee number should be read only and auto generated. That's the only change that I've implemented in here from the previous assignment. Now, why am I asking you to do it separately? It's actually only one assignment. Why am I asking you to do it separately? First, get it working. Just try out properties. Understand how properties work. And then once you're done that, then you can copy that code. Don't make changes in the same thing. Make a copy of that code and make changes in the second code. And in there, employee number must be read only and auto generated. Which means what now? What are the changes that you will require here? What does
declare it as a static?
No, I don't want the answers. What do you mean by the auto generated part here is that the first employee should get an employee number of 1. The second employee should get an employee number 2, third one 3, and so on and so forth. Now for testing this out, I've given you test cases also. So test it out with this code. So let's say you create 3 objects, employee 1, 2, and 3. And you try printing his employee number. So what should be the values that should be printed here? In this case, if you look at this,
1, 2, 3.
O1 dot employee number, O2 dot employee number, O3 dot employee number should print out 1, 2, and 3. But then after that, immediately after that, try printing in reverse order. And now the output should come out as 3, 2, 1. So if you get this correct, after trying this code, if you get this correct, that means you know that the logic that you use is correct. If you're not getting it correct, that means you need to relook at what logic you have done. So this is what I'm asking you to do. So these are the 2 assignments that I'm asking you to do. Create properties. That's it. All right. Obviously now, since your employee number is read only, the constructor changes. What is changing in the constructor? What is changing in the constructor? The employee number is not being accepted as a parameter in the constructor. It is only taking what? Name, basic, and department number. So this is what we are doing out here. So these are the 2 things that I wanted to do, but you have to attempt this only after you have finished trying out all the code examples that we've done in class today. All right. Any queries or questions or doubts about any of this? I will, upload these files. Give me 2 minutes after the session ends. I'll upload this. Any queries or questions or doubts about any of this? All right. So hopefully you will not ask your friends ki kya karne ka hai, or in English what is to be done, and you know what is to be done. Right. We'll stop the session here and see you all in the lab. All right. Bye for now.